In the quiet suburbs of Westridge, 10-year-old Amina Khalid navigates the typical challenges of 5th grade: homework, friendships, and finding her place in the world, all while proudly wearing her hijab as an expression of her Muslim faith. When her substitute teacher, Ms. Peterson, violently cuts off Amina's hijab in front of her classmates, claiming it violates school dress code, the classroom transforms from a place of learning into a battleground of religious freedom and personal dignity. What Ms. Peterson couldn't have anticipated was that Amina's mother, Lieutenant Colonel Samira Khalid, is a decorated military commander who will stop at nothing to fight for justice, igniting a movement that will challenge an entire community to examine its values and force a young girl to find strength she never knew she possessed. Before we begin, write in the comments where you're listening to our stories from. Subscribe to our channel. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Enjoy the story. Chapter 1. The Scissors. The classroom fell silent as Ms. Peterson's scissors glinted in the fluorescent light. 10-year-old Amina Khalid froze, her brown eyes widening with terror as the teacher approached her desk. "I've told you 3 times this week, Amina. Religious headwear violates our dress code," Ms. Peterson said, her voice cutting through the silence. "If you won't remove it, I will." Amina clutched the edges of her lavender hijab, the same one her mother had carefully pinned that morning before leaving for her military base. "Please," she whispered. "My mom says—" "Your mother isn't here," Ms. Peterson interrupted, raising the scissors. "And rules are rules." What the teacher didn't know as the first threads of Amina's hijab fell to the floor was that Lieutenant Colonel Samira Khalid would be returning from deployment tomorrow. And unlike her quiet daughter, the decorated combat commander never backed down from a fight. The 5th grade classroom of Westridge Elementary School had been Amina's safe haven until Ms. Peterson arrived 3 weeks ago as a substitute. The previous teacher, Mr. Williams, had always respected Amina's faith, even organizing a cultural day where she proudly explained the meaning of her hijab to curious classmates. But Miss Peterson was different. From her first day, she'd made comments about Amina's costume and how, in America, we show our faces. Each day, the comments grew more pointed, the stares more lingering, until today, when everything shattered. Amina felt the cold metal of the scissors brush against her cheek as Ms. Peterson began cutting. She wanted to scream, to run, to fight back. But fear paralyzed her. Tears streamed down her face as pieces of lavender fabric drifted to the floor like wounded butterflies. "Stop it!" The voice belonged to Zane, a boy who sat behind Amina. "You can't do that!" "Sit down, young man," Ms. Peterson snapped, not pausing in her task. "This is a matter of school policy." Other students began to murmur, some pulling out phones discreetly to record what was happening. Amina sat frozen, her shoulders hunched, trying to make herself smaller as the fabric that had protected her, that had connected her to her mother and her faith, was systematically destroyed. When Miss Peterson finally stepped back, satisfaction gleaming in her eyes, Amina's hair, usually hidden from all but family, was exposed to the entire class. The teacher held up the remains of the hijab like a trophy. "There, now you look like a proper American student." The bell rang, signaling lunch period. As students filed out, many casting backward glances at Amina, Ms. Peterson leaned down to whisper, "Your mother might let you play dress-up at home, but in my classroom, we follow the rules." Amina couldn't move. Her hands trembled as they touched her exposed hair. She felt naked, violated. The sacred boundary between her faith and the outside world had been forcibly removed, and with it, her sense of safety. Maya, Amina's best friend since 2nd grade, stayed behind. She shed her own hoodie and gently draped it over Amina's head. "Come on," she whispered. "Let's go to the nurse's office." In the hallway, their classmate Tyler approached, phone in hand. "I recorded it," he said quietly. "My mom's a lawyer. She'll know what to do." Amina nodded numbly, clutching Maya's hoodie around her head as they made their way to the nurse's office. She couldn't imagine facing the rest of the day. The stares, the whispers, but most of all, she couldn't imagine telling her mother what had happened. Lieutenant Colonel Samira Khalid had raised her daughter to be strong, to be proud of her faith and heritage. What would she think when she discovered Amina hadn't defended herself? The school nurse, Mrs. Rivera, listened in horror as Maya explained what had happened. Her face darkened with each detail, and she immediately called the principal. "This is completely unacceptable," Mrs. Rivera said, wrapping a protective arm around Amina. "Your religious rights are protected by law, sweetheart." Ms. Peterson had absolutely no right to do this. Principal Warner arrived minutes later, his usual composed demeanor rattled by the news. "Amina, I am so sorry this happened. I've already called your father to come pick you up." Amina's father, Dr. Khalid, worked at the university across town. Unlike her mother, who commanded respect with her mere presence, her father was gentle, soft-spoken. She loved him dearly, but right now, she wanted her mother's strength. "Can you call my mom instead?" Amina asked quietly. Principal Warner exchanged a glance with Mrs. Rivera. "Your father mentioned your mother is deployed overseas." Amina shook her head. "She's coming home tomorrow. She's at the base today. Please call her." The principal nodded and stepped out to make the call. Amina sat on the exam table, Maya still by her side, holding her hand. The room felt too bright, too exposed. She kept reaching to adjust her hijab, only to touch bare hair and remember. When Principal Warner returned, his face was pale. "Your mother is on her way," he said simply. What the principal didn't share was the ice in Lieutenant Colonel Khalid's voice when he'd explained the situation. He'd dealt with angry parents before, but something in the military officer's controlled fury made him immediately agree when she said she was coming right over, not tomorrow as planned. Amina closed her eyes, imagining her mother's reaction. Lieutenant Colonel Samira Khalid had commanded troops in combat zones, negotiated with tribal leaders, and coordinated complex military operations. She approached every challenge with strategic precision and unwavering determination. Ms. Peterson had no idea what was coming. 20 minutes later, the school's front office fell silent as Lieutenant Colonel Samira Khalid strode through the door in full military uniform. At 5'10", she cut an imposing figure, her posture ramrod straight, her hijab tucked perfectly beneath her military cap, according to regulation. The medals on her chest caught the fluorescent light, telling a story of courage, leadership, and sacrifice that few civilians could fully comprehend. "I'm here for my daughter, Amina Khalid," she stated, her voice calm but carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to giving orders that were obeyed without question. The secretary, momentarily stunned, quickly recovered. "Yes, ma'am. Principal Warner is expecting you. I'll take you to his office." Lieutenant Colonel Khalid nodded once. "And where is my daughter?" "In the nurse's office, ma'am. She's—" "Take me there first." It wasn't a request. The hallway parted as the secretary led Samira toward the nurse's office. Students and teachers alike stopped to stare at the uniformed officer whose presence seemed to fill the entire corridor. Some whispered, recognizing the significance of someone with her rank appearing at their school. When Amina saw her mother enter the nurse's office, she broke. The composure she'd desperately clung to crumbled as she ran into her mother's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Samira held her daughter close, one hand cradling Amina's exposed head, the other wrapped protectively around her shoulders. For a moment, the lieutenant colonel was simply a mother, whispering soothing words in Arabic, rocking gently as her daughter's tears soaked into her uniform. Then she looked up, meeting Mrs. Rivera's eyes over Amina's head. The nurse recognized the cold calculation beginning to replace maternal comfort. She'd seen that look before, in the eyes of soldiers returning from combat, the assessment of threat, the planning of response. "Who did this to my daughter?" Lieutenant Colonel Khalid asked, her voice so quiet it could barely be heard over Amina's sobs. "Ms. Peterson, a substitute teacher," Mrs. Rivera answered. "Principal Warner has already called her to his office." Samira nodded, processing this information. She gently held Amina at arm's length, wiping tears with practiced thumbs. "Listen to me, Habibi," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "What happened to you today was wrong. It was illegal, and it will not stand unchallenged." Amina nodded, drawing strength from her mother's certainty. "I need you to be brave for a little longer," Samira continued. "Can you tell me exactly what happened? From the beginning?" As Amina recounted the day's events, her mother's expression remained neutral, but there was a tightening around her eyes that anyone who had served under her would have recognized as dangerous. When Amina mentioned Tyler's recording, Samira's attention sharpened. "Where is this boy?" "Tyler? He's probably in the cafeteria," Maya spoke up. "I can get him." Samira nodded her thanks to Maya, then turned back to Amina. "I'm going to speak with your principal and this Ms. Peterson. You can wait here or come with me. It's your choice." Amina hesitated, then straightened her shoulders in unconscious mimicry of her mother's posture. "I want to come with you." A flicker of pride crossed Samira's face. "Very good." As they walked toward the principal's office, Samira removed her military cap and unwrapped her own hijab. With practiced movements, she draped it around Amina's head, securing it with gentle hands. "There," she said softly. "Until we get you a new one." The gesture brought fresh tears to Amina's eyes, but these were different. Tears of gratitude, of feeling protected again. She walked taller now, her mother's hijab a shield against the stares of students they passed. Principal Warner stood as they entered his office. "Lieutenant Colonel Khalid, thank you for coming so quickly. Please, have a seat." "I prefer to stand," Samira replied, her hand remaining on Amina's shoulder. "Where is the teacher responsible for assaulting my daughter?" The principal winced at the word assault, but couldn't dispute its accuracy. "Ms. Peterson is on her way. I've also contacted the superintendent and the school board president." "Good," Samira said, "because what happened today isn't just a violation of my daughter's religious rights. It's a hate crime." The door opened, and a thin woman with graying blonde hair entered. She faltered momentarily at the sight of Samira in full military uniform, but quickly recovered, her face setting into lines of defensive righteousness. "Ms. Peterson, thank you for joining us," Principal Warner said, his voice strained. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Khalid, Amina's mother." Ms. Peterson extended her hand. "I'm sorry we have to meet under these circumstances, but perhaps we can discuss the school's dress code policy like reasonable adults." Samira didn't take the offered hand. Instead, she fixed Ms. Peterson with a gaze that had made hardened soldiers straighten their backs. "Let's be very clear," Samira said, each word precisely measured. "There is no dress code policy at Westridge Elementary that prohibits religious headwear. Even if there were, it would be unconstitutional and unenforceable. Religious freedoms have limits in public institutions." Ms. Peterson began, but Samira cut her off. "I've spent 15 years defending those freedoms, Ms. Peterson. I'm intimately familiar with their scope and protection under law." The lieutenant colonel's voice remained even, but there was steel beneath the calm. "What you did today was not enforcement of policy. It was an act of bigotry that traumatized my child and violated her constitutional rights." Ms. Peterson's face flushed. "Now, see here." A knock interrupted them as Maya entered with Tyler, who nervously clutched his phone. "You wanted to see me, ma'am?" Tyler asked, looking up at Samira with a mix of awe and apprehension. "Yes," Samira smiled reassuringly at the boy. "I understand you have a recording of what happened in the classroom today." Tyler nodded, glancing anxiously at Miss E. Peterson, whose face had gone pale. "May I see it?" Samira asked. As Tyler pulled up the video, Miss Peterson took a step back. "This is ridiculous. You can't possibly—" "Be quiet," Samira said, not loudly, but with such authority that the room fell instantly silent. The video played, capturing the incident in devastating clarity. Ms. Peterson's voice rang out from the small speaker. "In America, we show our faces," followed by the unmistakable sound of scissors cutting fabric and Amina's quiet sobs. When it ended, the silence in the office was absolute. Principal Warner looked physically ill. Maya had tears streaming down her face. Amina stood tall beside her mother, drawing strength from her presence. "Tyler," Samira said gently, "would you be willing to send that video to Principal Warner and to me?" The boy nodded vigorously. "Thank you. You're a brave young man." She turned back to face Ms. Peterson, whose righteous indignation had crumbled into something approaching fear. "Now, shall we discuss consequences?" The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking the moment when everyone in the room realized that what had happened that morning wasn't going to be swept away with apologies or excuses. It was the beginning of a reckoning. What nobody in that office yet understood was that Lieutenant Colonel Samira Khalid didn't just command troops. She commanded respect from the highest levels of military leadership. Her exemplary service record, her strategic brilliance, and her groundbreaking role as one of the highest-ranking Muslim women in the U.S. Military had earned her connections and influence far beyond Westridge Elementary's small-town jurisdiction, and she was about to use every bit of it to ensure that what happened to Amina never happened to another child again. Chapter 2. The commander's response. Lieutenant Colonel Samira Khalid had faced insurgents, navigated political minefields, and led troops through active combat zones. But nothing had prepared her for the rage that coursed through her veins as she watched the video of her daughter being humiliated. In the principal's office, Ms. Peterson had shifted from defiance to a nervous shuffle, her eyes darting toward the door as if calculating an escape route. Principal Warner mopped his brow with a handkerchief, the gravity of the situation finally sinking in. "I'd like to speak with Ms. Peterson alone," Samira said, her voice dangerously calm. Principal Warner hesitated. "I don't think that's—" "It wasn't a request." Samira turned to Amina. "Sweetheart, why don't you and your friends wait outside with Principal Warner for a moment?" Amina nodded, understanding the look in her mother's eyes. She'd seen it before. When her mother handled difficult situations that required the absence of children, she took Maya's hand, and they followed the principal out, Tyler trailing behind them. When the door closed, Samira turned to Ms. Peterson. Gone was the careful composure she'd maintained in front of her daughter. Her eyes hardened, her stance shifted subtly into the commanding presence that had made seasoned generals take notice. "Do you know what I do, Ms. Peterson?" Samira asked, circling the teacher like a predator. Ms. Peterson swallowed. You're in the military. I command the 42nd Strategic Operations Battalion. I coordinate complex missions where lives hang in the balance. I've been deployed to 8 countries. I've faced enemy fire. I've buried soldiers under my command. Samira's voice remained low, controlled. And in 15 years of service, I have never, not once, encountered an enemy as cowardly as you. Ms. Peterson's face flushed. That's uncalled for. I was simply enforcing. You targeted a child, Samira cut her off. My child, because of her faith, because you thought there would be no consequences. She stepped closer. You were wrong. Are you threatening me, Missy? Peterson's voice quavered. Samira smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I don't make threats, Ms. Peterson. I assess situations, identify objectives, and execute strategies to achieve them. Right now, my objective is simple. Justice for my daughter and protection for every other child who might face your bigotry. She moved to the principal's desk and sat down, the authority with which she claimed the space making it clear who controlled the room. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to resign effective immediately. You will never teach in this district again. You will issue a public apology to my daughter. You can't force me to. I'm not finished, Samira continued, as if there had been no interruption. In addition, you will undergo cultural sensitivity training at your own expense, and you will make a donation to the Islamic Community Center equal to 1 month of your salary. Missy, Peterson's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for water. This is absurd. I don't have to do any of that. You're right, Samira conceded, leaning back in the chair. You have choices. You can accept these terms, or I can press criminal charges for assault, file a federal civil rights lawsuit, and contact every news outlet from here to Washington, D.C. She paused, letting the options sink in. Oh, and that video? It would make quite an impression on national television, don't you think? The blood drained from Ms. Peterson's face as she realized the extent of her vulnerability. You wouldn't. To protect my daughter and other children from people like you? Samira's eyes flashed. Try me. Outside the office, Amina sat between Maya and Tyler on a bench, the borrowed hijab wrapped securely around her head. The principal paced nearby, occasionally glancing at the closed door with apprehension. Your mom is so cool, Tyler whispered. Is she really a commander? Amina nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth despite everything. She leads hundreds of soldiers. When she gives an order, everyone listens. Ms. Peterson is definitely listening now, Maya said, squeezing Amina's hand. The office door opened, and Ms. Peterson emerged, her face ashen. She walked past them without a word, her heels clicking rapidly down the hallway toward the exit. Samira appeared in the doorway, her posture relaxed but her eyes alert, tracking Ms. Peterson's retreat. She beckoned to Principal Warner. I believe we have more to discuss. The principal followed her back into the office, casting a reassuring glance toward the children. It won't be long. Inside, Samira was already seated behind the desk again, her military cap placed precisely beside her. She gestured for Warner to sit. Miss Peterson has agreed to resign, she informed him. I expect you'll have her formal letter by the end of the day. Warner nodded, not entirely surprised. Lieutenant Colonel, I want to express my deepest apologies for what happened to Amina. This is not what our school stands for. Isn't it? Samira raised an eyebrow. Because, from where I'm sitting, it looks like exactly what your school stands for. Ms. Peterson felt comfortable enough to publicly humiliate a Muslim child. That suggests a culture of tolerance for intolerance. Warner winced. That's not fair. We have diversity initiatives, cultural awareness programs. Programs aren't enough when your teachers can violate a child's religious rights without immediate consequences. Samira leaned forward. So let's talk about meaningful changes. For the next 30 minutes, she outlined a comprehensive plan. Mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all staff, clear policies protecting religious expression, a student-led diversity council, and regular assessment of school climate with transparent reporting to parents. Warner listened, occasionally taking notes, increasingly aware that he was being presented not with suggestions, but with directives. When Samira finished, he cleared his throat. These are excellent ideas, Lieutenant Colonel. I'll need to discuss them with the school board, of course. Of course, Samira agreed smoothly. I've already scheduled a meeting with them for tomorrow morning. The superintendent will be joining us as well. Warner blinked. How did you arrange that so quickly? Samira smiled, a genuine one this time. Let's just say I have experience coordinating between multiple stakeholders under time pressure. What she didn't mention was the series of calls she'd made before arriving at the school, to her commanding officer, to a former comrade who now worked in the Department of Education, to a college friend who had become a prominent civil rights attorney. Wheels were already in motion, forces marshalling beyond the small sphere of Westridge Elementary. "Now," Samira continued, "I'll be taking Amina home for the rest of the day. I trust that her absence will be excused." "Absolutely," Warner assured her. "And again, I'm truly sorry this happened." Samira's expression softened slightly. "Apologies matter, Principal Warner, but actions matter more. I look forward to seeing yours." She stood, collecting her cap, and moved toward the door. Then she paused, turning back. "One more thing. The teacher who witnessed this incident but did nothing? What will happen to them?" Warner frowned. "I'm not sure I understand. There were other adults in the room besides Ms. Peterson. Teachers, assistants, someone who could have intervened but chose not to. What consequences will they face?" The question hung in the air, highlighting a dimension of responsibility Warner hadn't yet considered. "The bystanders, the silent enablers. I'll look into it immediately," he promised. Samira nodded, satisfied for now. "See that you do." Outside, Amina stood as her mother emerged from the office. She looked different somehow, still shaken, still hurt, but with a new awareness in her eyes, the beginning of understanding that injustice could be confronted, that she wasn't powerless. "Ready to go home, Habibi?" Samira asked gently. Amina nodded, then turned to Maya and Tyler. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For staying with me?" "For the video?" Tyler shuffled his feet awkwardly. "It was the right thing to do." "My mom says I should come over later," Maya said. "If that's okay?" She looked questioningly at Samira. "Of course," Samira smiled. "We'd love to have you. In fact, why don't you both come for dinner? I think your parents and I should meet." As they walked through the school corridors toward the exit, students and teachers alike stopped to watch. Word had spread rapidly about what happened in Ms. Peterson's class, about the military commander who had arrived like an avenging angel. Some students offered tentative smiles to Amina. A few teachers nodded respectfully to Samira. In the parking lot, as Samira opened the car door for Amina, a woman approached them hesitantly. She wore a teacher's ID badge that identified her as Mrs. Chen, Science. "Excuse me," she said. I wanted to say I'm sorry about what happened. Not all of us at Westridge are like Ms. Peterson." Samira studied the woman carefully. "Were you there? In the classroom?" Mrs. Chen looked down. "No, but I heard about it right away. I should have checked on Amina sooner." "Yes, you should have," Samira agreed, her tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "But you're here now. That's something?" Mrs. Chen nodded, accepting the assessment. "If there's anything I can do." "There is," Samira said. "Watch. Speak up. Don't let silence become complicity." She glanced at her daughter, who was listening intently. Amina and children like her deserve active allies, not just sympathetic bystanders. "I understand," Mrs. Chen said, "and I will. I promise." As they drove away from Westridge Elementary, Amina stared out the window, her fingers absently tracing the edge of her mother's borrowed hijab. "Are you okay?" Samira asked, glancing at her daughter. Amina considered the question. "Not yet," she answered honestly, "but I think I will be." Samira reached across to squeeze her hand. "Yes, you will. We both will." They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Amina spoke again. "Mom, what's going to happen tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," Samira said, her voice taking on the tone she used when briefing her troops. "We begin Phase 2. "What's Phase 2? "Accountability." Samira's eyes remained fixed on the road, but there was a determined set to her jaw. "Ms. Peterson resigned, but that's just the beginning. The school system needs to understand that what happened to you isn't an isolated incident to be handled with an apology and a personnel change. It's a symptom of a larger problem." Amina processed this, connecting it to lessons her mother had taught her about standing up for what was right, about using one's voice not just for oneself, but for others who might not be heard. "Can I help?" she asked quietly. Samira glanced at her, pride evident in her expression. "Of course you can. In fact, you're essential to the mission." Back at home, Amina went to her room to change while Samira made several more phone calls. The first was to her husband, updating him on the situation and asking him to come home early. The second was to her commanding officer, requesting an extension of her leave. The third was to her attorney friend, laying the groundwork for potential legal action. When Amina came downstairs, she had changed into comfortable clothes, but still wore her mother's hijab. She found Samira in the kitchen, preparing a pot of fragrant tea. "Mom?" Amina hesitated in the doorway. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." Samira poured 2 cups of tea, gesturing for Amina to join her at the table. "Were you scared? When you went to the principal's office to face Ms. Peterson?" Samira considered the question carefully. "Not scared exactly. Angry, yes. Determined, absolutely. But not afraid. She took a sip of tea. Why do you ask? Because I was scared, Amina admitted, looking down at her cup. When she started cutting my hijab, I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I just froze. Her voice trembled. I should have been brave like you. Samira set down her cup and reached across the table to lift Amina's chin gently. Listen to me very carefully, Amina. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's continuing despite that fear. And sometimes, when we're threatened, our bodies freeze as a protection mechanism. That doesn't make you weak or cowardly. But I didn't fight back, Amina insisted, tears welling in her eyes. You survived, Samira countered. You endured something no child should ever face. And afterward, you stood tall, came with me to confront her, and are now asking how you can help make sure it doesn't happen to other children. She smiled softly. That, my darling, is true courage. Amina wiped away a tear. I still wish I'd been stronger. You are strong, Samira assured her. Strength comes in many forms. Sometimes it's speaking out. Sometimes it's enduring. Sometimes it's asking for help when you need it. She reached for her phone. Which reminds me, we should call Grandma and Grandpa. They'll want to know what happened, and they always have wise perspectives. As Samira dialed her parents, Amina sipped her tea, drawing comfort from the familiar ritual. Her grandparents had immigrated to America before her mother was born. They had faced their own struggles with acceptance and belonging, had their own stories of resilience. Their wisdom had always been an anchor for the family. Mama? Yes, we're both fine, Samira spoke into the phone. But something happened at Amina's school today that you should know about. As her mother relayed the events to her grandparents, Amina gazed out the kitchen window at their backyard. The cherry tree they'd planted when they moved in 5 years ago was just beginning to blossom, delicate pink flowers emerging from winter-bare branches. It reminded her of something her grandmother often said, that life, like nature, moved in cycles of hardship and renewal. That after every winter came spring, bringing not just beauty, but a strength born from surviving the cold. Amina didn't know what tomorrow would bring, what challenges lay ahead as her mother launched Phase 2 of her response to today's events. But looking at those cherry blossoms, listening to her mother's strong, sure voice as she spoke to her grandparents, Amina felt something new unfurling inside her own heart. Not just the beginnings of healing, but the first stirrings of a resolve she recognized from watching her mother all these years. A determination that what happened to her would ultimately lead to something better, not just for herself, but for others. Outside the kitchen window, a gentle breeze stirred the cherry blossoms, sending a few drifting to the ground like pale pink promises of the changes to come. Just as Samira was finishing her call with her parents, the doorbell rang. Doctor? Khalid had arrived home early from the university where he taught engineering. Amina ran to the door, flinging it open and throwing herself into her father's arms. Baba! She cried, all her carefully maintained composure crumbling in the safety of his embrace. Doctor, Khalid held his daughter tightly, his gentle academic's hands stroking her back as she sobbed against his chest. Over her head, his eyes met his wife's, asking silent questions. Samira shook her head slightly. They would talk later when Amina wasn't listening. My brave girl, he murmured, kissing the top of her head through the hijab. My strong, beautiful daughter. For the rest of the afternoon, they created a cocoon of comfort around Amina. Her father helped her with the science homework she'd missed. Her mother prepared her favorite foods for dinner. They didn't avoid talking about what had happened. Khalid family didn't believe in avoiding difficult truths, but they balanced it with moments of normalcy, of laughter, of planning. When Maya and Tyler arrived for dinner with their parents, the conversation inevitably turned to the day's events and what would happen next. The adults spoke in the living room while the children gathered in the kitchen, helping to set the table. My mom says Ms. Peterson might face criminal charges, Maya said, arranging forks beside the plates. Tyler nodded, carefully placing glasses at each setting. My mom says the school board is having an emergency meeting tonight. She thinks the superintendent might get fired too. Amina listened to their speculation, surprised by how quickly events were unfolding. Her mother had set powerful forces in motion with just a few hours' work. It was both reassuring and slightly terrifying to witness the reach of her influence. In the living room, Samira was outlining her strategy to Maya's mother, who worked as a civil rights advocate, and Tyler's mother, the attorney. The school board meeting tomorrow is just the beginning, Samira explained. We need to push for systemic change, not just reactionary measures. I've already drafted a preliminary legal brief, Tyler's mother, Janet Thompson, said. The constitutional issues are clear-cut. The school doesn't have a leg to stand on. Maya's mother, Rebecca Washington, nodded. My organization can mobilize community support. We've dealt with similar incidents in other districts. The key is keeping the momentum going after the initial outrage fades. Dr. Khalid, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. What about Amina? How do we protect her through all of this? She's already been through so much today. Samira reached for her husband's hand, understanding his concern. As a professor of engineering, he approached problems methodically, always considering multiple variables and potential outcomes. His focus on Amina's well-being was a necessary counterbalance to her own strategic thinking. Amina's welfare comes first, she assured him. If at any point this becomes too much, we pull back. What none of them realized was that Amina had left the kitchen and was standing in the hallway, listening. Her father's question echoed in her mind. How do we protect her? For the first time that day, Amina felt a spark of frustration cutting through her hurt. She didn't want to be just protected. She wanted to be involved, to have a voice in what happened next. This was her story too, not just her mother's campaign or her father's concern. She stepped into the living room, standing tall despite her small frame. I want to speak at the school board meeting. 4 adult heads turned toward her in surprise. Amina, her father began gently. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, she interrupted, her voice stronger than any of them had heard it all day. I want to. It happened to me. I should tell them what it felt like, what it means. Samira studied her daughter, recognizing the resolve in her expression, the same determination she saw in the mirror every morning. Slowly, she nodded. If you're sure, Habibi, then yes, you should speak. Samira, Dr. Khalid protested. Is that wise? The media will be there. It could be overwhelming. It's her choice, Samira said simply. And she's right. Her voice matters in this, perhaps more than any of ours. Amina felt a rush of gratitude toward her mother for understanding, for not dismissing her desire to participate in her own story. Thank you. Chapter 3. The School Board. The West Ridge School District Administration building stood like a fortress of bureaucracy, all brick and narrow windows. By 8:30 a.m., the parking lot was filled beyond capacity, with cars lining the neighboring streets. News vans from 3 local stations had staked positions near the entrance, reporters doing live morning updates with the building as their backdrop. Lieutenant Colonel Samira Khalid surveyed the scene from their car, mentally mapping entry points and crowd dynamics just as she would in any tactical situation. Beside her, Dr. Khalid adjusted his tie nervously. In the back seat, Amina sat quietly, rehearsing the speech she had written the night before with her parents' help. Are you sure about this, Habibi? Samira asked, meeting her daughter's eyes in the rearview mirror. It's not too late to change your mind. Amina looked down at the paper in her hands, then back at her mother. I'm sure. I need to do this, Dr. Khalid turned in his seat to face his daughter. Remember, if it becomes too much, just signal me. We can leave immediately. Amina nodded, appreciating her father's concern, but knowing she wouldn't need the escape route. The fear she had felt yesterday in Ms. Peterson's classroom had transformed overnight into something else, a determination that burned steady and bright within her. She had spent hours writing and rewriting her speech, finding words for feelings that had previously seemed too big, too overwhelming to express. It's time, Samira said, checking her watch. She was dressed in civilian clothes today, a tailored pantsuit with her hijab arranged in elegant folds, but carried herself with the same commanding presence as when in uniform. As they approached the building, reporters surged forward, microphones extended. Samira positioned herself protectively in front of Amina, while Dr. Khalid flanked their daughter's other side. Lieutenant Colonel Khalid, can you comment on yesterday's incident at Westridge Elementary? Dr. Khalid, do you plan to file a lawsuit against the school district? Amina, how are you feeling today? Samira raised a hand, silencing the barrage of questions with the authority of someone accustomed to controlling chaotic situations. We will address the media after the board meeting. Right now, our focus is on ensuring the school district takes appropriate action to protect all students. They moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, neither rushing nor lingering, and entered the building where security personnel directed them to the boardroom. The large chamber was already nearly full, a buzz of conversation filling the air. At the front, a long table with microphones seated the 7 members of the school board, looking alternately concerned, defensive, or simply overwhelmed by the attention. Superintendent Margaret Barton, a tall woman with a steel gray bob, stood near the board table in hushed conversation with the board president, James Wilson. Their expressions were grim, their gestures tense. Maya and her mother had saved seats for the Khalids in the second row. Tyler and his mother, the attorney, were already seated nearby, laptops open and ready. Around them, the audience was a cross-section of the community: parents, teachers, religious leaders, and citizens drawn by news of the incident. What caught Amina's attention, however, was a group of girls about her age seated together across the aisle. Each wore a hijab in different colors and styles. She didn't recognize them from her school, but understood immediately why they were there. The sight of them, proud, unbowed, public in their faith, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Amina!" A soft voice called her name, and she turned to find Zane, the boy who had tried to stop Ms. Peterson in the classroom. He was with his parents, who nodded respectfully to the Khalids. "I just wanted to say, you're really brave." Amina smiled, the first genuine smile since yesterday's trauma. "Thank you. For everything." As they took their seats, Samira nodded to various community members she recognized. The imam from their mosque, her colleague from the base who had rearranged schedules to allow her extended leave, the university dean who worked with her husband. Allies gathered, positioned strategically throughout the room. At precisely 9 a.m., Board President Wilson called the meeting to order, his gavel striking 3 times to quiet the room. "Good morning. This emergency session of the Westridge School District Board has been called to address the incident that occurred yesterday at Westridge Elementary School." He cleared his throat, discomfort evident in his posture. "Before we begin, I want to make it clear that the actions reported do not reflect the values or policies of our district." Murmurs rippled through the audience, some skeptical, others supportive. "We have a full agenda today, including a statement from Superintendent Barton, a presentation of policy recommendations, and time for public comment." Wilson gestured to the first row. "However, I believe we should begin by hearing directly from the family affected by yesterday's incident." Samira raised an eyebrow, surprised by this deviation from protocol. It was a savvy move, acknowledging the Khalid's presence immediately rather than making them wait through bureaucratic preliminaries. Perhaps Wilson was more politically astute than she had given him credit for. "Lieutenant Colonel and Dr. Khalid, would you like to address the board at this time?" Samira stood, her presence immediately commanding the room's attention. "Thank you, President Wilson. Before my husband and I speak, our daughter Amina would like to address the board." A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Wilson looked briefly taken aback, but quickly recovered. "Of course. Amina, whenever you're ready." Amina rose from her seat, clutching her prepared speech in hands that trembled slightly. As she walked to the podium, adjusted for her height by a quick-thinking assistant, the room fell utterly silent. The sight of this small girl in a new purple hijab, facing a room full of adults with cameras recording her every expression, was compelling in its courage. She placed her paper on the podium, took a deep breath, and looked directly at the board members. "My name is Amina Khalid. I'm 10 years old, and I'm in 5th grade at Westridge Elementary." Her voice was soft but clear, carried throughout the room by the microphone. "Yesterday, my teacher cut off my hijab in front of my whole class because she said it was against the dress code." The stark simplicity of her opening statement hung in the air. No euphemisms, no softening of reality, just the truth, spoken in a child's direct way. When she started cutting, I was so scared I couldn't move or speak. Pieces of my hijab, the one my mom helped me put on that morning, fell on the floor. Amina paused, steadying herself. "Ms. Peterson said that in America, we show our faces. But I am American. I was born here. This is my country, too." Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Superintendent Barton's expression was unreadable, her eyes fixed on Amina. "My hijab isn't just cloth. It's part of who I am and how I practice my faith." When Ms. Peterson cut it off, she didn't just break dress code rules. She broke something inside me. Amina's voice wavered slightly, but she continued. "For a little while, she made me feel like I didn't belong in my own school, my own classroom, my own country." Tears glistened in her eyes, but she blinked them away, determined to finish. "I'm here today because I don't want any other kid to feel that way. Not Muslim kids, or Jewish kids, or Sikh kids, or any kid who is different." She straightened her shoulders, unconsciously mirroring her mother's posture. "My mom always says that when something bad happens, we have 3 choices. We can let it defeat us, we can let it define us, or we can let it strengthen us. I choose to be strengthened." A murmur of approval rippled through the audience. "Dr. Khalid wiped away a tear, his pride evident. Samira maintained her composed expression, but her eyes never left her daughter, watchful and protective. "I want Westridge Elementary to be a school where everyone feels safe, where everyone's religion is respected, where teachers protect us instead of hurting us." Amina looked up from her paper, making eye contact with each board member in turn. "I hope you'll help make that happen. Thank you." As she stepped away from the podium, the room erupted in applause. The girls in hijabs across the aisle were on their feet, their eyes shining with tears and solidarity. Maya gave her a thumbs up and Tyler nodded his approval. Even some of the board members joined the applause, recognizing the extraordinary courage it had taken for this child to speak publicly about her trauma. Amina returned to her seat between her parents, her father squeezing her hand in silent support while her mother whispered, "I am so proud of you, Habibi." President Wilson cleared his throat once the applause died down. "Thank you, Amina. Your bravery today is remarkable." He seemed genuinely moved. "Lieutenant Colonel Khalid, would you like to speak next?" Samira stood, buttoning her jacket as she approached the podium. Where Amina had been vulnerable and emotional, Samira was precise and strategic. She thanked the board for convening the emergency session, acknowledged the community members who had shown support, and then shifted into what could only be described as a military briefing. "Yesterday's incident represents a systemic failure at multiple levels," she stated, her voice carrying the authority of command. A teacher felt empowered to violate a student's constitutional rights. Administrative safeguards failed to prevent or immediately address this violation. And policies that should protect religious expression were either inadequate or inadequately enforced. She proceeded to outline a comprehensive set of demands: immediate revision of dress code policies to explicitly protect religious expression, mandatory cultural sensitivity, training for all staff, creation of a diverse community advisory council to review policies, clear protocols for reporting religious discrimination, and transparent accountability measures to track progress. "These are not requests," Samira concluded, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "They are necessary steps to ensure that what happened to my daughter never happens to another child in this district. My family has engaged legal counsel, but we prefer resolution to litigation. The choice is yours." As Samira returned to her seat, Dr. Khalid rose to speak. Where his wife had been forceful, he was thoughtful and measured, speaking as both a parent and an educator about the long-term psychological impact of discrimination on children and the importance of creating truly inclusive learning environments. "When my wife and I chose Westridge for our daughter, we believed we were choosing a community that valued diversity," he said, his academic's precision giving weight to his words. "Yesterday proved we were wrong. Today, you have an opportunity to begin rebuilding that trust, not just with our family, but with every family whose children may not fit a narrow definition of American." After the Khalid spoke, others from the community approached the podium. The imam from their mosque spoke eloquently about the importance of the hijab in Islam and the constitutional protections for religious expression. Teachers from Westridge Elementary, including Mrs. Chen, expressed their shock at what had happened and their commitment to creating a more inclusive environment. Most powerful were the testimonies from other students and parents who had experienced similar, if less dramatic, instances of religious or cultural insensitivity within the district. The Jewish boy told to remove his kippah during gym class. The Sikh teenager questioned repeatedly about his turban. The Native American student prohibited from wearing traditional ceremonial items at graduation. Amina listened, increasingly aware that what had happened to her was part of a larger pattern, a systemic problem that had been simmering beneath the surface of their seemingly progressive community. When all public comments concluded, Superintendent Barton approached the podium. Her expression was grave, her posture rigid with the tension of someone facing a career-defining crisis. "First, let me say directly to Amina and her family, what happened yesterday was inexcusable. On behalf of the entire district, I offer my deepest apology." She paused, making eye contact with the Khalids. "But I recognize that apologies without action are meaningless." She turned to address the board and the audience. "The recommendations presented by Lieutenant Colonel Khalid align with changes we should have implemented long ago. I am directing my staff to begin immediate work on revised policies protecting religious expression, with input from faith leaders and civil rights experts." Barton continued, outlining immediate steps. Ms. Peterson's resignation had been accepted. An investigation into whether other staff had enabled or failed to prevent the incident was underway. Cultural sensitivity training would begin next week for all district employees, and a community task force would be formed to review all policies through the lens of inclusivity and religious freedom. "Finally," she concluded, "I have submitted my own resignation to the board, effective as soon as a suitable replacement can be found. The failures that led to yesterday's incident occurred under my leadership, and accountability must begin at the top." A shocked murmur ran through the room. Few had expected the superintendent to fall on her sword so decisively. Samira exchanged a glance with Dr. Khalid, both recognizing the strategic value of Barton's move. By sacrificing herself, she was attempting to preserve the institution and demonstrate the seriousness with which the district was addressing the situation. Board President Wilson looked equally surprised, but quickly regained his composure. The board will need to discuss Superintendent Barton's resignation in executive session. In the meantime, we will vote on the immediate policy changes proposed today. What followed was a series of rapid, unanimous votes, approving the creation of the Community Task Force, the immediate revision of dress code policies, and the implementation of mandatory cultural sensitivity training. The board also approved a public statement condemning religious discrimination and affirming the district's commitment to protecting students' constitutional rights. As the meeting concluded, Wilson approached the Khalids, extending his hand first to Samira, then to Dr. Khalid. I hope these actions represent a meaningful first step. We have a lot of work to do to regain your trust. Samira nodded, her expression guarded, but not hostile. Actions speak louder than words, Mr. Wilson. We'll be watching closely to ensure these policies translate into real protection for all students. As they prepared to leave, reporters converged again, this time with even more questions. Samira agreed to a brief statement, positioning Amina between herself and Dr. Khalid, a protective formation. Today, the school board took important first steps toward addressing the religious discrimination that occurred at Westridge Elementary, she stated, her voice carrying across the crowd. We are cautiously optimistic about the proposed changes, but remain committed to ensuring they result in meaningful improvements for all students. A reporter called out, Lieutenant Colonel Khalid, will you still pursue legal action against the district? Samira's response was measured. That depends entirely on whether today's promises translate into tomorrow's practices. Our goal has never been punishment, but protection, for our daughter and for every child in this district. Another shouted, Amina, how do you feel about going back to school? Before Samira could intervene, Amina stepped forward slightly. I'm nervous, she admitted, her voice steadier than anyone might have expected. But I'm not going to let fear stop me from getting an education. That's what my mom and dad have always taught me. The simple dignity of her response silenced the press corps momentarily, many visibly moved by this child's resilience. As they finally broke free of the media and walked toward their car, they were approached by the group of hijabi girls Amina had noticed earlier. The oldest, perhaps 13 or 14, stepped forward. Assalamu alaikum, she greeted Amina. I'm Nadia. We go to Greenfield Middle School across town. We wanted you to know that you're not alone. Amina's eyes widened. Walaikum assalam, she replied softly. We're having a gathering this weekend at the Islamic Center, another girl added. A solidarity event. Would you come? You could meet other Muslim girls from around the city. Amina looked questioningly at her parents. Samira smiled and nodded. We'd be honored to attend. As they continued to their car, Amina walked taller, the weight of isolation lifting slightly from her shoulders. All around them, community members offered words of support. Handshakes, nods of respect, murmured blessings. In the car, Dr. Khalid turned to his daughter. You are magnificent, Amina. Truly. Indeed, Samira agreed, starting the engine. A perfect execution of Phase 2. Amina buckled her seatbelt, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. What's Phase 3, Mom? Samira met her daughter's eyes in the rearview mirror, a spark of determination shared between them. Phase 3, Habibi, is returning to school tomorrow with your head held high. That will be the hardest part, but also the most important. Dr. Khalid reached for his wife's hand, squeezing it gently. Are we sure she's ready? It's only been 2 days. I'm ready, Baba, Amina said quietly but firmly. I need to go back. Otherwise, Ms. Peterson wins, Samira nodded, understanding. In military terms, this was about reclaiming conquered territory, refusing to cede ground to the enemy. In human terms, it was about a little girl refusing to let fear keep her from her rightful place in the world. As they drove away from the administration building, news vans following at a distance, Amina gazed out the window at the passing landscape. Yesterday, her world had been violently upended, her sense of security shattered. Today, she had found her voice, spoken her truth to power, and been heard. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, curious stares, awkward questions, the empty space where Ms. Peterson's desk had been, but she would face them, strengthened by today's victories and protected by the knowledge that she was not fighting alone. In the front seat, Samira was already planning, her strategic mind mapping out contingencies, identifying potential allies and obstacles for tomorrow's mission. But beneath the commander's calculations was a mother's fierce pride in her daughter's courage and a renewed determination to transform this painful episode into lasting change. As they pulled into their driveway, Amina's phone buzzed with messages from classmates who had watched the board meeting online or seen clips on local news. Words of support, admiration, and solidarity filled her screen. Maya had created a group chat titled Amina's Army, where classmates were coordinating to wear purple, the color of Amina's new hijab, to school tomorrow in solidarity. For the first time since the incident, Amina laughed, a genuine, carefree sound that filled the car and lifted her parents' hearts. It was the laugh of a child beginning to heal, a tentative step back toward the joyful girl she had been before Ms. Peterson's scissors had changed everything. That evening, as Samira helped Amina prepare for the next day, carefully arranging a new collection of hijabs that community members had brought to their home throughout the afternoon, she asked, "Are you nervous about tomorrow, Habibi?" Amina considered the question seriously, selecting a royal purple hijab with subtle silver threading. "Yes," she admitted, "but it's a different kind of nervous than before." "Different how?" "Before, I was scared of standing out, of being different." Amina ran her fingers along the delicate fabric. "Now, I'm just worried about doing the right thing, saying the right words. I want to be brave, but not angry. Strong, but not mean." Samira's heart swelled with pride at her daughter's wisdom. "That, my love, is the mark of true leadership, and the hardest balance to strike." "Did you learn that in the army, Mom?" "I did," Samira smiled, "but I'm still learning it every day." "We all are." As they finished arranging the hijabs, Dr. Khalid appeared in the doorway. "The principal called," he announced. "They've assigned Mrs. Chen to take over Ms. Peterson's class for the rest of the year." Amina brightened. "Really? I like Mrs. Chen. She's always nice to everyone." "She specifically requested the assignment," Dr. Khalid added, "and she wanted me to tell you she's looking forward to having you back tomorrow." This small kindness, a teacher volunteering to guide Amina's class through the aftermath, was exactly the type of action that gave Samira hope. Structural changes were essential, but ultimately it would be individual choices made by people like Mrs. Chen that would determine whether Westridge truly transformed. Later that night, after Amina had gone to bed, Samira and Dr. Khalid sat in their living room, the events of the past 2 days weighing heavily on them both. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Dr. Khalid asked softly. "Sending her back so soon?" Samira sighed, setting down the policy documents she'd been reviewing. "Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wants to keep her home, protected, for as long as possible. But Amina wants to go back, and I think she needs to, on her own terms, with her head held high." "She's so much like you," he observed with a gentle smile. "The same determination, the same courage. And the same sensitivity beneath the strength," Samira added. "That's what worries me. She puts on a brave face, but this has wounded her deeply. The healing will take time." Dr. Khalid nodded, understanding. "At least she won't face it alone. The community has rallied around her in ways I never expected." It was true. Throughout the day, messages of support had poured in from around the country. The local Islamic center had organized volunteers to accompany Muslim students to and from school. Interfaith leaders had issued a joint statement condemning religious discrimination. Even the mayor had called to express her support and promise a citywide initiative to combat Islamophobia. What had begun as one teacher's act of cruelty was catalyzing a movement for change far beyond Westridge Elementary. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Samira said, reaching for her husband's hand, "we'll face it together, as a family." "As a family," he echoed, squeezing her hand in return. Upstairs, Amina lay in bed, scrolling through the messages of support on her phone. The anxiety about tomorrow still fluttered in her stomach, but alongside it was something new, a sense of purpose, of belonging to something larger than herself. Tomorrow would be difficult, but she would walk into Westridge Elementary wearing her hijab proudly, surrounded by friends wearing purple in solidarity, and carrying the strength of her family, her faith, and her community with her. As she drifted toward sleep, Amina found herself thinking not about Ms. Peterson's scissors or the falling pieces of her hijab, but about the words she had spoken at the board meeting. "When something bad happens, we have 3 choices. We can let it defeat us, we can let it define us, or we can let it strengthen us. I choose to be strengthened." She was beginning to understand what those words truly meant. Chapter 4. Return to Westridge dawn broke with streaks of amber and rose across the sky as Amina stood before her bedroom mirror, carefully arranging her royal purple hijab. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, tucking and pinning the fabric until it framed her face perfectly. Today's hijab was special, not just because of its beautiful silver threading, but because it represented a conscious choice to return, to reclaim, to resist. "Bismillah," she whispered, a prayer for protection and strength as she prepared to face Westridge Elementary again. A soft knock on her door was followed by her mother's voice. "May I come in?" "Yes, Mom." Lieutenant Colonel Samira Khalid entered, already dressed in her civilian clothes for the day, a tailored blazer and pants with a deep blue hijab. She stood behind Amina, their reflections side by side in the mirror, 2 generations of Muslim American women preparing to face a world that didn't always welcome them. "Beautiful," Samira said, adjusting a fold of Amina's hijab with gentle fingers. "Are you ready?" Amina took a deep breath. "I think so. Remember, I'll be dropping you off and picking you up today. Your father will be meeting with Principal Warner while you're in class, and I'll be consulting with the district's policy committee." Samira placed her hands on Amina's shoulders, meeting her daughter's eyes in the mirror. "If anything at all, makes you uncomfortable, you call me immediately. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Amina replied, the military response bringing a small smile to both their faces. "Good. Now, let's have breakfast. Your father's making his famous shakshuka." Downstairs, the kitchen was filled with warm, spicy aromas as Dr. Khalid transferred the egg and tomato dish from skillet to plates. He looked up as they entered, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "There are my 2 warriors," he said affectionately. "Ready for battle?" Amina sat at her place, noticing her father had arranged the shakshuka on her plate in a smiley face, just as he had done when she was younger and facing a difficult day. The small gesture of normalcy and care brought a lump to her throat. "It's not a battle, Baba," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "It's just school." Dr. Khalid exchanged a look with Samira over Amina's head. They both knew it wasn't just anything. Today would be challenging in ways they couldn't fully predict. As they ate, they kept the conversation deliberately light, discussing an upcoming science project, the book Amina was reading, plans for the weekend. This, too, was part of their strategy, maintaining routines, focusing on the ordinary alongside the extraordinary. After breakfast, as they gathered their things to leave, the doorbell rang. Dr. Khalid opened it to find Maya and her mother on the doorstep. "We thought maybe Amina would like some company on the ride to school," Maya explained, holding out a small gift bag decorated with purple ribbons. Amina stepped forward, surprised and touched. "You didn't have to come." "Of course we did," Maya insisted, pressing the bag into Amina's hands. "Plus, I have something for you." Inside the bag was a small pin in the shape of a purple butterfly. "It's for your hijab," Maya explained. "If you want to wear it, I mean. Purple butterflies are going to be our symbol today. Everyone's wearing them." "Everyone?" Amina asked, confused. Maya's mother smiled. "Maya and I have been busy. The Amina's Army group chat has expanded quite a bit since last night." Samira raised an eyebrow, looking to Maya's mother for explanation. "About half the school will be wearing purple today," she explained. "And these," she held up her own purple butterfly pin. "The Islamic Center donated hijabs in various shades of purple for any girl who wants to wear one in solidarity. And the community center printed these pins overnight." Amina stared at the butterfly pin, then at Maya, struggling to find words. This level of support had never occurred to her. "Let me help you put it on," Samira offered, carefully attaching the butterfly to Amina's hijab where it wouldn't damage the fabric. "There. Perfect." As they drove to school, following Maya's family's car, Amina's anxiety began to resurface. What if the purple butterflies weren't enough? What if the other students stared or whispered? What if she walked into the classroom and couldn't stop remembering Ms. Peterson's scissors? Samira seemed to sense her daughter's spiraling thoughts. "Remember your training, Habibi," she said softly. "My training?" Amina looked confused. "The breathing exercises we practiced. 4 counts in, hold for 7, out for 8. It's what I teach my soldiers for managing stress in difficult situations." Amina nodded, beginning the rhythmic breathing pattern her mother had shown her. By the time they pulled into the school parking lot, her heart rate had slowed to something approaching normal. Then she saw them. Lining the walkway to the school's entrance were dozens of students, parents, and teachers. A corridor of friendly faces, many wearing shades of purple. Some girls who weren't usually hijabis wore purple scarves over their hair in solidarity. Boys had purple bandanas tied around their arms or purple ribbons pinned to their shirts. Teachers wore purple ties, scarves, and blouses. At the front of this unexpected receiving line stood Principal Warner, Mrs. Chen, and a woman Amina didn't recognize, who seemed to be directing the gathering with confident gestures. "Who's that?" Amina asked, nodding toward the unfamiliar woman. Samira smiled. "That's Dr. Fatima Nazari, the cultural integration specialist the district hired yesterday. She works with schools to improve religious and cultural inclusivity." "They hired someone already?" "The superintendent may be resigning, but she's making sure certain changes happen before she leaves," Samira explained, parking the car. "Dr. Nazari is highly respected in her field. I recommended her personally." As they exited the car, Maya and her mother joining them, the reality of what was happening began to sink in. This wasn't just a few friends showing support. This was a coordinated statement from the entire school community. a visible rejection of what Ms. Peterson had done, and an embrace of Amina and what she represented. Principal Warner stepped forward as they approached. "Good morning, Amina, Lieutenant Colonel and Dr. Khalid. Welcome back." His sincerity was evident, his relief at seeing Amina return palpable. "Thank you, Principal Warner," Samira replied formally, her hand remaining protectively on Amina's shoulder. The woman Samira had identified as Dr. Nazari approached next, extending her hand first to Samira, then to Amina. "Assalamu alaikum," she greeted them, her hijab a vibrant shade of teal against her dark business suit. "I'm Fatima Nazari. It's an honor to meet you both." "Walaikum assalam," they responded in unison. Dr. Nazari knelt slightly to meet Amina at eye level. "Amina, I want you to know how much you've already helped change things at Westridge. Your bravery has inspired this entire community. I'll be working with your school for the rest of the year to make sure it becomes a place where everyone's faith and culture are respected." Amina nodded, overwhelmed but grateful. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen stepped forward next, her kind face solemn. "Amina, we've prepared the classroom, but I want you to know that you don't have to go in today if you're not ready. We could start with just a visit, or you could join us after lunch, or whatever makes you comfortable." Amina appreciated the options but shook her head. "I want to go to class." She looked at her mother, then back at Mrs. Chen. "I'm ready." "Very well," Principal Warner said. "Mrs. Chen will accompany you. Lieutenant Colonel Khalid, if you and Dr. Khalid would like to join me in my office first, there are some additional matters I'd like to discuss." Samira hesitated, clearly reluctant to let Amina out of her sight. "It's okay, Mom," Amina assured her. "I have Maya and Mrs. Chen. And," she gestured at the purple-clad students lining the walkway, "apparently, I have an army." A flicker of pride crossed Samira's face. "All right, but remember, call you if anything happens," Amina finished. "I will." As Amina and Maya followed Mrs. Chen toward the school entrance, the corridor of supporters began to applaud softly. Some offered words of encouragement, others simply smiled or nodded respectfully. The gesture was touching without being overwhelming, supportive without turning Amina into a spectacle. Zane, the boy who had tried to stop Ms. Peterson, stepped forward from the line. "We've got your back, Amina," he said simply. Tyler, who had recorded the incident, gave her a thumbs up. "Looking good, butterfly girl." By the time they reached the school doors, Amina was walking taller, her steps more confident. The support was like armor, fortifying her against the fears that had threatened to overwhelm her earlier that morning. Inside, the school corridors were decorated with newly hung posters about religious diversity and cultural respect. One bulletin board featured an exhibition titled Faith Across Cultures, showcasing students' contributions about their various religious traditions. Another displayed a large, colorful banner that read, "Westridge Elementary, where every faith has a place." "Dr. Nazari helped us put these together yesterday afternoon," Mrs. Chen explained. The students contributed artwork and information about their own traditions. Your classmates were especially eager to participate. As they approached Ms. Peterson's former classroom, now Mrs. Chen's, Amina felt her steps slow involuntarily. This was the space where it had happened, where her sense of safety had been violently disrupted. Could it ever feel secure again? Mrs. Chen seemed to sense her hesitation. "We've rearranged the room," she said gently, "and there's something special waiting inside that I think you'll appreciate." Taking a deep breath, Amina pushed open the classroom door. The layout had indeed changed completely. The desks were now arranged in collaborative groups rather than rows, and Ms. Peterson's large desk had been replaced with a smaller table positioned differently. The walls were freshly decorated with student work and colorful educational posters, effectively transforming the space. But what caught Amina's attention immediately was the glass display case near the windows. Inside, protected behind clear panels, were dozens of mini hijabs of all colors and patterns, each one carefully crafted and mounted on a tiny display stand. "What is this?" Amina asked, moving closer to examine the intricate collection. Mrs. Chen smiled. "Your classmates made them yesterday after school. They wanted to learn about the different styles and patterns of hijabs from around the world. Each student researched a different country or tradition and created a miniature version." Amina stared at the display, speechless. There were Arab-style hijabs, Malaysian tudungs, Indonesian kerudungs, Turkish-style wraps, and even fashion-forward Western adaptations. Each bore a small card identifying the style, its origin, and the student who had created it. "They worked so hard," Mrs. Chen continued. "They wanted you to know that they respect your faith and want to learn more about it, not fear it or try to change it." Tears welled in Amina's eyes as she spotted a particularly beautiful purple hijab with a small tag reading, "Khaliji style from Saudi Arabia, researched and created by Zain." Maya squeezed her hand. We all helped, but it was Zain's idea. He felt really bad about not doing more to stop Ms. Peterson. Before Amina could respond, the classroom door opened, and her classmates began filtering in for the morning session. A hush fell over the room as they noticed her standing by the display case, but it quickly gave way to smiles, waves, and quiet greetings. "Welcome back, Amina," a girl named Sarah said, approaching cautiously. "We like your butterfly." "Thanks," Amina managed, still overwhelmed by the display, and now by the normalcy with which her classmates were treating her. No one was staring at her hijab or whispering behind their hands. They were simply welcoming her back, as if her belonging in this classroom had never been in question. Mrs. Chen called the class to order, directing everyone to their new seating arrangements. Amina found herself at a group table with Maya, Zain, and a girl named Olivia, who wore a purple ribbon in her hair. "Before we begin our regular lessons," Mrs. Chen announced, "I want to take a moment to acknowledge what happened in this classroom 2 days ago. What Ms. Peterson did was wrong. Legally, ethically, and morally wrong. It violated Amina's religious rights and created a hostile environment for learning." The classroom was silent, every student attentive. Part of education is learning from mistakes, even terrible ones made by adults who should know better, Mrs. Chen continued. "So today, instead of trying to pretend nothing happened, we're going to talk about religious expression, cultural respect, and how we can make Westridge a place where everyone feels safe to be themselves." She moved to the whiteboard and wrote in large letters, "Respect, learn, protect." "These are going to be our classroom values from now on," she explained. "We respect each other's differences. We learn about cultures and faiths that might be different from our own, and we protect each other's right to express who we are." Amina felt a warmth spreading through her chest, replacing the cold knot of anxiety that had resided there since Mrs. Peterson's attack. Mrs. Chen was transforming what had been a space of trauma into one of learning and healing. As the morning progressed, Mrs. Chen guided the class through a thoughtful discussion about religious freedom and cultural expression. Students asked questions, some awkward, some insightful, all genuine. Amina found herself speaking up more than she ever had before, explaining aspects of her faith that she had previously kept private out of fear of being seen as different. "Why is the hijab important to you?" Olivia asked during a small group discussion. Amina considered the question. "It connects me to my faith and my community," she explained. "It reminds me of who I am and what I believe, and it's a choice I make every day to honor those things." "But didn't your mom make you wear it?" another student asked hesitantly. "She taught me about it, but it's my choice," Amina clarified. "In our faith, hijab is between a person and God. No one can force it, and no one should force someone to remove it either." Zain, who had been quiet for most of the discussion, finally spoke up. "I'm really sorry I didn't do more to stop Ms. Peterson," he said, his voice low. "I should have tried harder." Amina shook her head. "You did try. You spoke up when most people stayed quiet. That was brave." "Not brave enough?" he insisted. "Bravery isn't about being perfect," Amina said, echoing her mother's words. "It's about doing something even when you're scared." Mrs. Chen, who had been circulating among the groups, paused near them. "That's a profound insight, Amina. Bravery takes many forms, and sometimes speaking up is the hardest form of all." By lunchtime, Amina felt a shift within herself. The classroom that had been a site of violation was being reclaimed, not erasing what had happened, but transforming its meaning. She was no longer simply a victim in this space. She was becoming a teacher, a leader, someone with valuable perspectives to share. In the cafeteria, she was surprised to find herself at the center of a larger circle than usual. Students from other classes, wearing purple and butterfly pins, asked to sit with her. Even some older kids from the 6th grade stopped by to express their support. "My big sister goes to Greenfield Middle School," a 6th grade girl told her. "She's one of the hijabis who came to the board meeting. She says you're a hero for speaking up." Amina blushed. "I'm not a hero. I just didn't want what happened to me to happen to anyone else." "That's kind of what heroes do," the girl pointed out with a shrug before rejoining her friends. Meanwhile, in Principal Warner's office, Lieutenant Colonel Khalid and Dr. Khalid were engaged in a very different kind of conversation. They sat across from Warner, with Dr. Nazari joining them, reviewing the comprehensive changes being implemented across the school and district. "We've revised the dress code explicitly to protect religious expression," Principal Warner explained, sliding a document across his desk. And we're implementing a new incident response protocol for any reports of religious or cultural discrimination. Samira reviewed the documents with a critical eye, noting areas of strength and potential weaknesses. These are good first steps, but implementation will be the real test. How will you ensure these policies translate into daily practice? Doctor. Nazari leaned forward. That's where my role comes in. I'll be conducting weekly observations, providing ongoing professional development, and meeting regularly with a student-parent advisory council to assess progress. Dr. Tour, Khalid studied the proposed advisory council structure. I notice this includes representatives from various faith traditions. That's encouraging. We want diverse perspectives, Warner affirmed, and we'd be honored if you would both consider serving on this council, at least initially. Samira and Dr. Khalid exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. I'll serve, Dr. Khalid agreed. My academic schedule is flexible enough to accommodate the meetings. And I'll consult as needed, Samira added. But my military duties may prevent regular attendance. However, I can recommend several qualified community members who would be valuable additions. The discussion continued, covering everything from curriculum revisions to staff training to community engagement strategies. It was clear that Warner and the district were taking this incident as a catalyst for comprehensive reform, not merely damage control. As the meeting concluded, Warner hesitated, then spoke with genuine emotion. I want you both to know how deeply sorry I am that Amina experienced this in our school. As an educator, as a principal, and as a human being, I failed her. That's a responsibility I take personally, and it's why these changes aren't just policies to me. They're a commitment to doing better. Samira studied the man carefully, assessing his sincerity. Apologies matter, Principal Warner, but actions matter more, he finished for her. I know, and I intend to prove through actions that Westridge can become the inclusive community it should have been all along. As they left the office to meet Amina for lunch, Dr. Khalid squeezed his wife's hand. What do you think? Are they serious about these changes? Warner is, Samira replied thoughtfully. He's genuinely shaken by what happened. As for the district, we'll see. Political pressure can motivate action, but sustaining it will require deeper commitment. And, Miss Peterson, any news on potential charges? Samira's expression hardened slightly. The county prosecutor is reviewing the case. Given the video evidence and multiple witnesses, there's a strong possibility of criminal charges for assault and civil rights violations. They found Amina in the cafeteria, surrounded by friends old and new, animated in a way they hadn't seen since before the incident. She was explaining something about her hijab to a group of fascinated students, her hands moving expressively as she spoke. Look at her, Dr. Khalid murmured. She's thriving. She's resilient, Samira corrected gently. The trauma is still there, but she's finding her way through it. Amina spotted them and waved, excusing herself from her friends to join her parents. Mom, Dad, you should see our classroom. They made a whole display of miniature hijabs from around the world. And Mrs. Chen held a discussion about religious freedom, and everyone asked questions, and I got to explain about our faith, and… Samira laughed softly, wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. Breathe, Habibi. It sounds wonderful. It is, Amina confirmed. It's different now. Not perfect, but better. Dr. Khalid beamed with pride. And you're a big part of making it better, Amina. Your courage has inspired all of this. Amina considered this, a new awareness dawning in her eyes. I didn't feel courageous when it happened. But maybe courage isn't always about how you feel in the moment. Maybe it's about what you do afterward. Samira exchanged a glance with her husband over Amina's head. Their daughter was growing before their eyes, drawing wisdom from adversity in a way that both awed and humbled them. Wise words, little one, Samira said softly. Wise words, indeed. After lunch, as Amina returned to class with renewed confidence, Samira and Dr. Khalid met with Dr. Nazari to discuss broader initiatives beyond Westridge Elementary. The incident had exposed systemic issues that affected Muslim students throughout the district and beyond. The solidarity we're seeing today is powerful, Dr. Nazari observed, but sustainable change requires structural adjustments. We need comprehensive religious literacy education for all staff, clear accountability mechanisms, and ongoing community engagement. And we need this to extend beyond Westridge, Samira added. What happened to Amina could happen at any school where these protections aren't explicitly in place. They spent the afternoon developing a framework for district-wide reforms, drawing on successful models from other communities and adapting them to their local context. Dr. Khalid's academic expertise, Samira's strategic planning skills, and Dr. Nazari's professional experience combined to create a roadmap for meaningful change. When the final bell rang, Samira made her way to Mrs. Chen's classroom to collect Amina. She found her daughter surrounded by classmates, exchanging contact information and making plans for weekend gatherings. The sight of Amina so comfortably integrated, so clearly belonging in this space that had been the site of her trauma, brought unexpected tears to Samira's eyes. This, she realized, was victory. Not the policy changes or the potential legal consequences for Ms. Peterson, important as those were. Victory was her daughter reclaiming her place, her voice, her right to exist fully as herself in her school and community. As they walked to the car, Amina chattering excitedly about her day, Samira noticed a familiar figure standing near the school entrance. A woman in a gray suit, watching them intently. The county prosecutor, with whom Samira had spoken earlier that day. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken communication passing between them. The prosecutor nodded once, decisively, then turned to leave. Samira understood the message. Charges would be filed. Justice would be pursued. "Mom? Everything okay?" Amina asked, noticing her mother's momentary distraction. Samira smiled, returning her full attention to her daughter. "Everything is fine, Habibi. Better than fine, actually. How does ice cream sound to celebrate your successful return to school?" Amina's face lit up. "Can Maya and Zayn come too? They've been amazing today." "Of course." Samira pulled out her phone to coordinate with the other parents. The more, the merrier. As they drove home later that afternoon, Amina with a chocolate ice cream cone and new plans with her friends, Samira reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 3 days. What had begun as a traumatic violation had catalyzed a movement for change that was rippling outward, transforming not just Westridge Elementary, but potentially schools throughout the district and beyond. And at the center of it all was Amina, no longer just a victim, but a catalyst, a voice, a symbol of resistance and resilience. The daughter Samira had always known she was raising, strong, compassionate, and unafraid to stand for what was right. That evening, as Amina prepared for bed, she paused before removing her purple hijab, studying her reflection in the mirror. For the first time since Mrs. Peterson's scissors had violated her religious expression, she felt fully comfortable in this essential part of her identity again. The hijab was no longer just a connection to her faith and heritage. It had become a symbol of her own strength and the community that had rallied around her. "Alhamdulillah," she whispered, a prayer of gratitude for the difficult lessons and unexpected blessings of these challenging days. In her parents' room, Samira was on the phone with her commanding officer, finalizing arrangements for her return to duty the following week. The crisis phase was passing. Life needed to resume its normal rhythms. But both she and Amina were returning to their regular routines, transformed by what they had experienced. Stronger, more determined, and more aware of both the challenges and the possibilities of being visibly Muslim in America. As she ended the call, Dr. Khalid entered, sitting beside her on the edge of the bed. "The prosecutor called," he said quietly. "They're filing criminal charges against Ms. Peterson tomorrow. Assault, violation of civil rights, and endangering the welfare of a child." Samira nodded, absorbing this information. "Good. Actions have consequences. She needs to face hers." "They want Amina to testify if it goes to trial," he added, concern evident in his voice. "Do you think she's ready for that?" Samira considered the question carefully. "A month ago, I would have said no. But now—" She thought of Amina speaking confidently at the school board meeting, explaining her faith to curious classmates, reclaiming her place in a community that had initially failed to protect her. "Now I think she might be stronger than any of us realized." Dr. Khalid smiled, taking his wife's hand. "She gets that from her mother." "And her thoughtfulness from her father," Samira countered affectionately. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the events of the past few days settling around them. The crisis wasn't over. There would be legal proceedings, ongoing policy implementations to monitor, potential backlash to navigate, but the immediate danger had passed, and in its wake was a renewed sense of purpose and possibility. "So what now, Commander?" Dr. Khalid asked, half teasing, half serious. Samira leaned against her husband's shoulder, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability that few besides him ever witnessed. "Now we continue the mission. We support Amina. We remain vigilant. We ensure the changes promised become realities." She paused reflectively. "And we remember that sometimes the most effective way to fight injustice is to stand so firmly in your truth that the world has to make space for it." From across the hall came the sound of Amina's laughter as she video-chatted with Maya, planning their weekend visit to the Islamic Center's Solidarity event. The sound washed over her parents like a blessing, a reminder of resilience and the healing power of community. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight In this moment, there was peace in the knowledge that they had faced darkness and emerged not just intact, but strengthened as individuals, as a family, and as part of a community that had ultimately chosen to stand for justice when it mattered most. Chapter 5. The Prosecution. 3 weeks after the incident that had upended their lives, the Khalid family sat in County Prosecutor Elena Martinez's office, reviewing what would happen next. The room was furnished with understated professionalism. Dark wood furniture, law books lining the walls, and a window overlooking the courthouse plaza. Prosecutor Martinez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a reputation for tenacity, placed a folder on the desk between them. The grand jury has returned indictments on all 3 charges against Evelyn Peterson, she announced. Assault in the 2nd degree, violation of civil rights, and endangering the welfare of a child. Samira nodded, her military training evident in her composed reaction to this significant development. Beside her, Dr. Khalid squeezed Amina's hand supportively. The girl had been quiet since they entered the prosecutor's office, absorbing everything with watchful eyes. "What happens now, Dr.?" Khalid asked. "Ms. Peterson will be officially charged tomorrow morning," Martinez explained. "Given the nature of the case and her lack of prior criminal record, she'll likely be released on her own recognizance pending trial. There will be an arraignment where she'll enter a plea." "And if she pleads not guilty?" Samira inquired, though she already knew the answer. "Then we proceed to trial," Martinez confirmed. "Which brings me to the most important part of our discussion today." She turned her attention to Amina, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "Amina, in a case like this, your testimony would be essential. The video evidence is compelling, but hearing directly from you about what happened and how it affected you would be powerful for a jury." Amina sat up straighter, unconsciously mimicking her mother's posture. "I want to testify," she said with unexpected firmness. "I need to." Martinez exchanged a glance with the Khalids, gauging their reaction to their daughter's determination. "It's not an easy process," she cautioned. "Ms. Peterson's attorney will ask you difficult questions. Try to suggest you misunderstood what happened, or that it wasn't as serious as you claim." "I know what happened," Amina replied, her voice steady. "And I know how it made me feel. No one can tell me I didn't experience what I did." Pride flickered across Samira's face at her daughter's resolve. 3 weeks ago, Amina had been silenced by trauma, unable to speak for days. Now, she was insisting on telling her story in the most public and consequential forum possible. "Very well," Martinez nodded, impressed by the young girl's determination. "But we'll need to prepare you thoroughly. We'll practice the kinds of questions you might face, work on staying calm if things get difficult, and make sure you understand exactly what to expect in the courtroom." "When will the trial be, Doctor?" Khalid asked, professional concern evident in his voice. As a professor, he was thinking about Amina's schoolwork, the disruption to her routine, the stress of preparation. "Criminal trials typically take several months to come to court," Martinez explained. "However, given the public interest in this case and the fact that it involves a minor, we've requested an expedited schedule. Realistically, we're looking at 6 to 8 weeks. Samira's brow furrowed slightly. "That timeline could coincide with my next deployment rotation." The unspoken concern hung in the air between the parents, whether Samira would be present for her daughter during the trial, or whether that responsibility would fall solely to Dr. Khalid. Martinez made a note. "We can work with the military liaison if necessary. Given the circumstances, there might be accommodation options available." As the adults discussed logistics, Amina's attention drifted to the window overlooking the courthouse plaza. Below, people moved about their business. Attorneys in suits, civilians coming and going, a school group on what appeared to be a civics field trip. Ordinary life continuing while hers remained in this strange limbo between the incident and its resolution. The past 3 weeks had brought significant changes. At school, Mrs. Chen had transformed their classroom into a model of inclusive education, with regular cultural exchange activities and discussions about respecting differences. The mini hijab display had become a permanent installation, with students continuing to research and add new styles. Dr. Nazari's presence had extended beyond Westridge Elementary to other schools in the district, implementing similar reforms across the board. Amina herself had become something of a reluctant celebrity. She'd been interviewed by the local newspaper, with her parents present and strict limitations on questions. She'd been invited to speak at the Islamic Center's youth program about standing up for religious rights. She'd even received letters from Muslim girls in other states who had faced similar discrimination. It was empowering, but also overwhelming. Sometimes she just wanted to be a regular 5th grader again, concerned with science projects and friendship dramas, not a symbol or spokesperson for religious freedom. "Amina!" Her father's voice pulled her back to the present. Ms. Martinez asked if you have any questions about the trial. Amina considered carefully. Will Ms. Peterson be there when I testify? Will I have to look at her? Martinez nodded, appreciating the directness of the question. Yes, defendants have the right to face their accusers. But you'll be looking at me when you answer questions, not at her. And your parents will be in the courtroom for support. What if I get scared or forget what to say? That's completely normal, Martinez assured her. If you need a moment, you can say so. The judge will understand. And remember, you're just there to tell the truth about what happened. You don't need to memorize anything or worry about saying things perfectly. Amina nodded, filing away this information. One more question. What happens to Ms. Peterson if she's found guilty? The adults exchanged glances, each weighing how to explain potential sentencing to a 10-year-old. That would be up to the judge, Martinez finally answered. The charges she faces could result in jail time, probation, fines, community service, or some combination. She would also likely lose her teaching license permanently. I don't want her to teach other kids, Amina said firmly. But I don't know if I want her to go to jail, Doctor. Khalid placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. The justice system will determine the appropriate consequences, sweetheart. Our job is simply to tell the truth about what happened. As they left the prosecutor's office, Samira's phone buzzed with a notification. She checked it, her expression darkening almost imperceptibly. What is it, Doctor? Khalid asked quietly as they walked toward the elevator. Samira showed him the screen, a news alert reporting that Ms. Peterson had given her first public interview to a conservative media outlet, framing herself as a victim of cancel culture and anti-American sentiment. The headline read, "Teacher defends actions against Muslim student." It was about school rules, not religion. Doctor, Khalid's jaw tightened. She's trying to control the narrative before charges are even filed. It won't work, Samira replied, her voice low to prevent Amina from overhearing. Not with the video evidence and multiple witnesses, but it means this is going to get uglier before it's resolved. In the car, Amina noticed her parents' tension. Is everything okay? She asked from the back seat. Samira met her daughter's eyes in the rearview mirror, making a split-second decision about honesty versus protection. Ms. Peterson gave an interview defending what she did to you, she explained carefully. She's trying to make people believe she was just enforcing school rules. Amina absorbed this information, her expression thoughtful rather than distressed. That's not what she said when she was cutting my hijab, she observed. She said, in America, we show our faces. That wasn't about school rules. That was about me being Muslim. The clarity of her daughter's perception struck Samira. You're right, Habibi, and the truth will come out at trial. Can I read the interview? Amina asked. Her parents exchanged glances. I don't think that's a good idea right now, Doctor, Khalid answered gently. It might upset you unnecessarily. But if I'm going to testify, don't I need to know what she's saying about me? It was a reasonable question, one that highlighted the challenging position they were in, wanting to protect Amina while also respecting her growing role in her own story. Ms. Martinez will prepare you for that, Samira assured her. She'll make sure you understand any claims, Ms. Peterson makes so you're not caught off guard during testimony. Amina seemed satisfied with this answer. Where are we going now? She asked, noticing they weren't heading home. The Islamic Center, Samira replied. Imam Hassan wants to meet with us about the community response to the trial announcement. Since the incident, the local Islamic community had rallied around the Khalid family, offering everything from legal advice to home-cooked meals to child care assistance when Samira and Dr. Khalid needed to attend meetings. The solidarity had been overwhelming and deeply appreciated, a reminder that they weren't facing this challenge alone. At the Islamic Center, they were greeted warmly by Imam Hassan, a respected community leader who had known Amina since she was a toddler. He led them to his office, where a small group had gathered. Community organizers, interfaith leaders, and a civil rights attorney who was consulting on the case. Assalamu alaikum, the Imam greeted them. Thank you for coming after what I'm sure was a difficult meeting with the prosecutor. Wa alaikumus salam, they responded in unison. We wanted to update you on our plans for supporting the family through the trial, explained Kareem Malik, the community organizer. We're creating a rotation schedule for court attendance to ensure the community presence is consistent but not overwhelming. We're also coordinating with the Interfaith Coalition to demonstrate that this is not just a Muslim issue, but one of religious freedom for all. Rabbi Goldstein, representing the local synagogue, nodded in agreement. My congregation stands with you completely. What happened to Amina is appalling, and we want to show that people of all faiths recognize the importance of respecting religious expression. Reverend Williams from the First Baptist Church added, "We've committed to a prayer vigil outside the courthouse on the first day of trial. Peaceful, dignified, but visible." As the adults discussed logistics and strategy, Amina found herself drawn to a wall of photographs in the imam's office. Images of community events, interfaith gatherings, and celebrations over the years. She spotted her parents in several pictures, and even herself as a younger child at Eid festivities. One photo in particular caught her attention. A group of women in hijabs of various styles standing proudly in front of the Islamic Center, some holding American flags. The caption read, "Muslim Women's March for Peace, 2020. Her mother was among them, looking strong and determined. "That was an important day," Imam Hassan said, noticing Amina's interest in the photograph. "There had been some anti-Muslim incidents in our community, and instead of hiding away in fear, these women organized a public march to show that they belonged here, that they were American too." "Just like what we're doing now," Amina observed thoughtfully. "Yes, exactly like that," the Imam agreed. "Your mother understands that visibility is sometimes the most powerful response to those who would prefer we remain invisible." The conversation in the room had shifted to media strategy, with Kareem expressing concern about Mrs. Peterson's recent interview. "She's trying to frame this as a culture war issue," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "Portraying herself as defending American values against foreign influence." "Which is ironic," Samira noted dryly, "given that religious freedom is a foundational American value, and my family has served this country for 2 generations." "The media narrative is crucial," the civil rights attorney emphasized. "We need to consistently reinforce that this is about constitutional rights and the safety of children, not cultural or religious conflicts." "What about Amina's privacy?" Dr. Khalid asked, voicing a concern that had been growing as media interest in the case intensified. "She's already dealing with so much. I don't want her exploited or turned into a political symbol." All eyes turned to Amina, who had rejoined the group, reminded once again that she was at the center of something much larger than herself. "I don't mind talking sometimes," she said carefully, "but not all the time. And I don't want to be on TV or have my picture everywhere." The adults nodded, respecting her boundaries. "We'll establish clear protocols with the media," Kareem assured them. "Limited access, no photographs without explicit permission, and pre-approved questions only." As the meeting continued, Amina found her attention wandering again. Outside the imam's window, she could see children playing in the Islamic Center's courtyard, running, laughing, completely unconcerned with press conferences or trial strategies. A part of her longed to join them, to escape into the simple joys of childhood, if only for a little while. Sensing her daughter's restlessness, Samira caught her eye and nodded subtly toward the door, permission to step outside if she wished. Amina slipped quietly from the room, making her way to the courtyard, where the sounds of play replaced the serious discussions of the adults. "Amina!" called a familiar voice. It was Nadia, the hijabi middle schooler she had met after the school board meeting. "Come play with us!" For the next hour, Amina lost herself in a game of tag, her worries about testimony and trials temporarily forgotten in the simple pleasure of running and laughing with other Muslim children who understood her without explanation. Here, her hijab wasn't a political statement or a subject of controversy. It was just part of who she was, as normal and unremarkable as the color of her eyes. When her parents finally emerged from the meeting, they found her breathless and smiling, her cheeks flushed with exertion and joy. It was a welcome sight, a reminder that despite everything she had been through, Amina was still a child, resilient and capable of happiness even in the shadow of difficult times. "Good meeting?" she asked as they walked to the car. "Productive," Samira confirmed. "The community has a solid plan for supporting us through the trial." "And you?" Dr. Khalid asked, noting her brightened mood. "Good game?" "The best," Amina grinned. "Nadia taught us a new version of tag they play at her school. Can she come over sometime? She's really cool." "Of course," her parents agreed, exchanging relieved glances over her head. Amina forming connections with other Muslim girls, especially slightly older ones who could serve as role models, was exactly what they had hoped would come from this difficult situation. A strengthening of her identity and community bonds, rather than a withdrawal from them. The next morning, as promised, Evelyn Peterson was formally charged in a brief court proceeding. The Khalids did not attend, preferring to maintain distance from the defendant until absolutely necessary, but they watched the news coverage from home. Ms. Peterson appeared on screen looking markedly different from the imperious teacher who had wielded scissors against Amina's hijab. She had adopted a subdued, almost meek demeanor, dressed conservatively in a high-necked blouse and modest skirt. She pleaded not guilty to all charges, her attorney declaring to waiting reporters that they looked forward to presenting the full context of the incident at trial. "What does full context mean?" Amina asked, watching the coverage with her parents. "It means they're going to try to justify what she did," Samira explained honestly. "They might claim she was enforcing legitimate rules, or that she didn't intend to harm you, or perhaps that her actions were misinterpreted." "But there's a video," Amina pointed out, the logical inconsistency troubling her. "Everyone can see what happened." "People see what they want to see sometimes," Dr. Khalid said gently. "Some will look at that video and see a teacher abusing her authority. Others might see what they believe is necessary discipline or protection of secular values." Amina considered this, her brow furrowed. "That's not fair." "No," Samira agreed. "It's not. But fairness isn't always how the world works. That's why we have courts and laws to try to create fairness where it might not naturally exist." The media coverage intensified over the following days. Conservative commentators began questioning whether the charges were excessive, suggesting that political correctness was driving the prosecution. Liberal outlets emphasized the constitutional protection of religious expression and the trauma inflicted on a child. The case was becoming a battleground in America's ongoing culture wars, with Amina caught in the crossfire. Through it all, the Khalid family maintained a careful distance from the media frenzy. They declined most interview requests, issued only brief statements through their attorney, and focused instead on helping Amina prepare for both the upcoming trial and her everyday life as a fifth grader. 2 weeks after the charges were filed, Prosecutor Martinez arranged the first preparation session for Amina's testimony. They met in a conference room at the prosecutor's office designed to be less intimidating than a formal courtroom. Comfortable chairs, plants in the corners, and floor-to-ceiling windows that filled the space with natural light. "Today we're just going to talk through what happened, step by step," Martinez explained, setting a digital recorder on the table between them. "I'll record our conversation so I can review it later and identify any areas where we need to work on clarity or detail. Is that okay with you, Amina?" Amina nodded, though her posture was tense. Samira sat beside her, a silent support, but allowing her daughter to speak for herself. "Let's start at the beginning," Martinez suggested. "Tell me about that morning before you went to school. Was it a normal day? What was your routine?" Amina relaxed slightly, grateful to begin with something familiar and unthreatening. "It was a regular morning. Mom helped me put on my lavender hijab. It's my favorite because it has little silver stars along the edge. We had breakfast together and then Mom left for the base because she had meetings all day." "And when you got to school? Was anything different that day?" Amina's expression clouded. "Ms. Peterson seemed angry right from the start. She kept looking at me during morning announcements. I tried to ignore it because she'd made comments about my hijab before, but nothing serious had happened yet." "What kind of comments had she made previously?" Martinez asked, her tone neutral but encouraging. "She called it a costume once. Another time she asked if I wasn't hot wearing it, and when I said no, she said it seemed un-American to cover up so much." Amina's voice grew quieter. "I told my dad about the comments, and he emailed the principal, but nothing really changed." Martinez nodded, making notes. "So there was a pattern of behavior before the actual incident. That's important." She looked up. "Now, tell me exactly what happened that day in the classroom." Amina took a deep breath, her hand unconsciously reaching up to adjust her hijab, a habit that had become more pronounced since the incident, as if constantly reassuring herself it was still there. "I was working on a drawing in my journal after finishing my math assignment. Ms. Peterson came to my desk and asked what I was doing. I showed her my completed math work, but she took my journal anyway and started flipping through it. Then she said something about my grades slipping because I was distracted by drawing." "Were your grades actually slipping?" Martinez interjected. "No," Amina shook her head emphatically. "I had straight A's. She just said that to make me look bad in front of everyone." "Then what happened?" "She started talking about my hijab, how it was showy and too elaborate for school. Then the morning announcements came on, and Principal Warner reminded everyone about the dress code. Ms. Peterson seemed really happy about that, like it proved her point, even though our dress code never said anything about religious headwear." Amina's breathing quickened slightly as she approached the most difficult part of her account. Samira placed a gentle hand on her daughter's back, a silent reminder of support. "She told me to stand up and come to the front of the class. She made me stand by the whiteboard and told everyone I was an example of a dress code violation. I tried to explain about my medical exemption, that's what Mom calls the religious accommodation paperwork we filed with the school, but Ms. Peterson wouldn't listen." Martinez nodded encouragingly. "You're doing great, Amina. What happened next?" "She said I had to take my hijab off or I'd be sent home." When I refused, she grabbed my arm and said we'd go to the nurse's office to sort it out. She was squeezing really hard. Amina rubbed her upper arm reflexively, as if still feeling the pressure. Zain told her to stop, but she ignored him. As we were leaving, I saw Maya recording with her phone. The account continued through their walk to the nurse's office, Ms. Peterson's lies about having parental permission, and finally, the devastating moment when the scissors came out and began cutting through Amina's hijab. "How did you feel when she started cutting?" Martinez asked gently. Amina was quiet for a long moment, struggling to find words for the complexity of emotions she had experienced. Scared, humiliated, like I wasn't even a person to her, just a problem to fix. And she hesitated, glancing at her mother. "It's okay, Habibi," Samira encouraged. "You can say whatever you felt." "And I felt angry," Amina admitted. "Not just sad, but really angry. She had no right to touch me or my hijab. No right at all." Martinez nodded, something like approval flashing briefly in her eyes. "That anger was completely justified, Amina. What Ms. Peterson did violated your personal boundaries, your religious rights, and your dignity. Feeling angry about that is normal and appropriate." The session continued for another hour, with Martinez guiding Amina through the aftermath of the incident. Her silence, her father picking her up, her mother's arrival, the confrontation with Miss Peterson and Principal Warner, and the beginning of healing that had come from community support and school reforms. When they finished, Martinez turned off the recorder and smiled at Amina. "You did beautifully. Your account is clear, detailed, and consistent with the evidence we have. You're going to be a very compelling witness." "Was I okay saying I was angry?" Amina asked, still uncertain about expressing negative emotions so openly. "I don't want people to think I'm vindictive or something." "Honesty is always okay," Martinez assured her. "A jury needs to understand not just what happened, but how it affected you. That includes all your feelings, even the difficult ones." As they prepared to leave, Martinez handed Samira a folder. These are some news clippings about the case so far, including quotes from Ms. Peterson's interview and her attorney's statements. I've highlighted the specific claims they're making so you can be prepared for the defense strategy. Samira accepted the folder with a nod of thanks. "And the trial date? Any update?" "The judge has set it for 6 weeks from now," Martinez confirmed. "May 15th. That gives us plenty of time for preparation without dragging things out unnecessarily." In the car, Amina was quieter than usual, processing the emotional toll of revisiting the incident in such detail. Samira watched her in the rearview mirror, concerned but also impressed by her daughter's composure during the difficult session. "You did well today, Habibi," she said softly. "I know it wasn't easy." "It was harder than I thought," Amina admitted. Talking about it made it feel like it was happening all over again. "That's normal," Samira assured her. "But each time you tell your story, it becomes a little more yours and a little less something that was done to you." "Does that make sense?" Amina considered this, then nodded slowly. "I think so, like I'm taking back control." "Exactly," Samira smiled, once again struck by her daughter's perceptiveness. "By speaking your truth, you reclaim your narrative." The weeks leading up to the trial passed in a blur of preparation and normalcy, the extraordinary and ordinary aspects of their lives weaving together in unexpected ways. Amina continued attending school, where Mrs. Chen's classroom had become a model of inclusive education that other teachers were beginning to emulate. She participated in the Islamic Center's youth programs, finding strength in her faith community. She played with friends, completed homework, and experienced the typical ups and downs of pre-adolescence. Alongside these normal activities, she attended weekly preparation sessions with Prosecutor Martinez, gradually becoming more comfortable with the testimony process. Dr. Nazari visited their home to help Amina understand the psychological aspects of the trial, how to manage anxiety, how to remain centered when facing Ms. Peterson in court, how to cope with potentially difficult questions from the defense attorney. Samira, meanwhile, was navigating her own challenge. Her commanding officer had been supportive thus far, arranging flexible schedules and extended leave to accommodate the family crisis. But as the trial approached, a new deployment rotation was looming, one that would potentially take her overseas during the final weeks of court proceedings. "Request denied," Colonel Richards informed her during a private meeting on base, genuine regret in his eyes. "I've pushed this as far up the chain as I can, Khalid. The mission requirements are non-negotiable, and your expertise is specifically needed." Samira maintained her professional composure, but the conflict tore at her. Her military career was not just a job, but a calling, a way of serving the country she loved. Yet her daughter needed her now more than ever. "When would I deploy?" she asked, already calculating timelines against the trial schedule. "May 10th, Richards replied. 5 days before the trial begins. The timing couldn't have been worse. Samira would miss not only Amina's testimony, but the entire trial unless proceedings were delayed, which seemed unlikely given the judge's commitment to an expedited schedule. "I understand, sir," she said, accepting the reality while her mind raced through alternatives. "Request permission to coordinate with Prosecutor Martinez regarding the timing of my daughter's testimony." "Granted," Richards nodded. "And Khalid, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. What happened to your daughter was inexcusable. If there was any way I could adjust this deployment without compromising the mission, I would." That evening, Samira shared the news with Dr. Khalid after Amina had gone to bed. They sat in the kitchen, mugs of tea growing cold between them as they discussed their options. "I could request a delay in the trial," Samira suggested, though her tone indicated she already knew the problems with this approach. Dr. Khalid shook his head. "The longer this drags out, the harder it is on Amina. She needs resolution, not prolonged uncertainty. And there's no guarantee you'd be back in time even with a delay." "Then I could refuse the deployment," Samira said, voicing the option that had been circling in her mind since the meeting with Colonel Richards. "Request a hardship discharge if necessary." Dr. Khalid studied his wife's face, understanding the magnitude of what she was suggesting. Samira's military career was central to her identity, a source of pride and purpose that had shaped their family life for years. Giving it up would be no small sacrifice. "Is that really what you want?" he asked gently. Samira gazed into her tea, searching for clarity in the amber liquid. "What I want is irrelevant. What matters is what Amina needs." "And what does Amina need?" Dr. Khalid pressed. "A mother who sacrificed her career for her, potentially breeding resentment over time? Or a mother who showed her how to balance duty to family with duty to country, even when it's difficult?" Samira looked up sharply. "Are you suggesting I deploy during my daughter's trial, after everything she's been through?" "I'm suggesting we talk to Amina," Dr. Khalid replied calmly. "She's proven herself remarkably mature throughout this ordeal. Perhaps she deserves a voice in this decision, too." The next morning, they presented the situation to Amina over breakfast, explaining the deployment requirement and the timing conflict with the trial. "So you'd miss the whole thing?" Amina asked. Fork paused midway to her mouth. "Yes," Samira confirmed, watching her daughter carefully. "Unless we request a delay in the trial, which might not be granted, or..." "Or what?" Amina prompted. Samira and Dr. Khalid exchanged glances. "Or I could refuse the deployment," Samira said quietly. "Request a discharge from military service." Amina's eyes widened. "But you love being a soldier, and you always say your work protects people who can't protect themselves." "I do love it," Samira acknowledged, "but I love you more. And right now, you need protection too." Amina was quiet for a long moment, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate as she processed this information. Finally, she looked up, her expression surprisingly resolute. "I think you should go," she said firmly. "I have Baba and Prosecutor Martinez and Mrs. Chen and the whole community supporting me. I'll be okay." "Habibi, are you sure?" Samira asked, her voice thick with emotion. "This isn't a small thing. I would be halfway around the world while you're testifying about one of the most difficult experiences of your life." "I know," Amina nodded. "But you've already taught me everything I need to know. You taught me to be brave, to stand up for my faith, to face difficult things without backing down." She reached across the table to take her mother's hand. "Now, I need to show you I was listening." Tears filled Samira's eyes, a rare display of vulnerability from the usually composed lieutenant colonel. Dr. Khalid watched them both with pride, marveling at the wisdom and generosity of their daughter. "We could still try for a delay," Samira offered, giving Amina one last chance to request her presence. But Amina shook her head. "Ms. Peterson wanted me to be ashamed of my hijab, of my faith, of who I am. The best way to prove her wrong is to stand up in court without being afraid, whether you're there or not." She smiled, a hint of mischief lightening her serious expression. "Besides, when you get back, we can celebrate the guilty verdict together." Prosecutor Martinez was less sanguine about the development when Samira informed her later that day. "It's not ideal," she admitted frankly. "Juries respond to the presence of supportive family members, especially in cases involving children. Having Dr. Khalid there helps, but having both parents would be stronger." "We don't always get ideal circumstances," Samira replied pragmatically. "We adapt and overcome. It's what soldiers do, and it's what my daughter is learning to do as well." Martinez's expression softened slightly. "She's an extraordinary young woman. You should be very proud." "I am," Samira affirmed. "Every day." The final weeks before the trial and deployment passed swiftly. Samira attended every preparation session with Amina, working closely with Martinez to ensure all possible scenarios were covered. She met with community leaders, confirming support arrangements for Dr. Khalid and Amina during her absence. She coordinated with Dr. Nazari to provide additional emotional support for her daughter throughout the trial. At home, she spent quality time with Amina, creating memories and reinforcing bonds that would sustain them through their separation. They cooked traditional family recipes together, Samira teaching techniques passed down through generations. They visited museums and parks, enjoying simple pleasures without the shadow of the trial looming over them. In the evenings, they practiced their faith together, finding solace and strength in shared prayers. The night before her deployment, Samira sat on the edge of Amina's bed, watching her daughter arrange her newest hijab, a beautiful emerald green silk with gold embroidery that they had chosen together for the trial. "It's perfect," Samira said softly. "You'll look so beautiful and dignified in court." "Do you think the jury will care what my hijab looks like?" Amina asked, smoothing the delicate fabric. "People notice presentation," Samira explained. "But more importantly, wearing something that makes you feel confident will help you stay strong during testimony." Amina carefully returned the hijab to its protective covering and turned to face her mother. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not just about testifying, but about you leaving. What if I need you and you're not there?" Samira gathered her daughter into her arms, holding her close. "I'll be there in all the ways that matter most," she promised. "Everything I am, everything I believe, everything I've taught you. It's all already inside you. And when you speak your truth in that courtroom, my voice will be speaking through yours, even from across the ocean." Amina buried her face against her mother's shoulder, breathing in her familiar scent, memorizing the feeling of security in her embrace. "Promise you'll stay safe." "I promise to be as careful as my duty allows," Samira answered honestly, the same promise she had made before every deployment. "And I promise to be as brave as my duty requires," Amina responded, completing their ritual exchange. The following morning, the family drove to the base for Samira's departure. The goodbye was brief but emotional, with promises of video calls when possible and letters when not. As Samira shouldered her pack and walked toward the waiting transport, she turned back one last time to see her husband and daughter standing tall, supporting each other, their faces reflecting both love and resolve. It was an image she would carry with her across oceans and time zones, a reminder of why she served and what she was fighting to protect. 4 days later, the trial of Evelyn Peterson began. Amina stood on the courthouse steps beside her father, surrounded by supporters from the Islamic Center, interfaith allies, and community members. She wore the emerald hijab with quiet pride, a butterfly pin, now the recognized symbol of the movement that had grown from her experience, secured near her right temple. Prosecutor Martinez approached, her expression confident. "Ready?" she asked simply. Amina nodded, drawing strength from her father's presence beside her and her mother's spirit within her. "Ready." Together, they walked up the steps and through the doors, prepared to speak truth to power and demand justice. Not just for one girl's hijab cut away by bigotry's scissors, but for the dignity and religious freedom of all. Chapter 6. Justice and Healing. The Jefferson County Courthouse stood like a temple of justice against the clear blue sky, its columns rising 3 stories above the broad steps where journalists and spectators gathered. Inside Courtroom 3, polished oak benches held a diverse crowd. Community members, educators, faith leaders, and curious citizens drawn by the case that had ignited national debate about religious freedom in American schools. Amina sat at the prosecutor's table beside Ms. Martinez, her emerald hijab perfectly arranged, her posture mirroring the military straightness her mother had always maintained. Dr. Khalid sat directly behind her in the first row, positioned where she could easily turn to see his encouraging smile. Across the aisle, Evelyn Peterson sat beside her defense attorney, Robert Whitman, a sharp-featured man known for representing clients in politically charged cases. Ms. Peterson looked markedly different from the imperious teacher who had wielded scissors against Amina's hijab. She wore a conservative navy dress with a modest cross necklace, her gray blonde hair arranged in a simple style that suggested humility rather than authority. Judge Sandra Mosley, a veteran jurist with 30 years on the bench, called the court to order. "In the case of State versus Peterson, are both sides ready to proceed?" "Ready for the people, Your Honor," Martinez stated confidently. "Ready for the defense," Whitman echoed. What followed was 3 days of testimony that laid bare not just the events of that fateful classroom day, but the systemic failures and personal prejudices that had enabled them. The jury, 7 women and 5 men of diverse backgrounds, listened intently as witness after witness recounted their perspectives on what had happened. Principal Warner testified about the school's religious accommodation policies, which clearly protected Amina's right to wear her hijab. Under cross-examination, he admitted to initially downplaying the severity of the incident, a decision he now regretted. In hindsight, he acknowledged, I failed to recognize the profound violation of Amina's religious rights and personal dignity. Our response should have been immediate and unequivocal condemnation of Ms. Peterson's actions. Mrs. Chen described entering the nurse's office after the incident, finding Amina traumatized and silent, clutching the remains of her hijab. In 20 years of teaching, she testified, I've never seen a child so completely shattered by an adult's actions. Maya and Tyler testified about witnessing the incident, with Tyler's video shown to the jury, the damning footage causing several jurors to wince visibly as the sound of scissors cutting fabric filled the courtroom, accompanied by Amina's quiet sobs and Ms. Peterson's cold voice saying, In America, we show our faces. The school nurse reluctantly admitted she had failed in her duty to protect Amina. I should have questioned Ms. Peterson more forcefully, she acknowledged, tears in her eyes. I should have called Amina's parents immediately. I will regret my inaction for the rest of my career. Dr. Nazari provided expert testimony on the psychological impact of the incident, explaining how religious garments like the hijab are deeply connected to identity and self-worth, particularly for children developing their sense of self. Forcibly removing a child's religious attire isn't merely a violation of their constitutional rights, she explained. It's an assault on their personhood, their cultural identity, and their spiritual dignity. The trauma from such an experience can reverberate for years, affecting everything from academic performance to social relationships to basic trust in authority figures. On the third day, the moment arrived that everyone had been waiting for, Amina's testimony. As she approached the witness stand, the courtroom fell silent, the collective tension palpable. She looked so small next to the judge's bench, yet carried herself with remarkable composure as she was sworn in. Prosecutor Martinez began gently, establishing Amina's background, her exemplary academic record, and her understanding of her religious practices. Then she guided Amina through the events leading up to and including the cutting of her hijab, allowing the girl's clear, straightforward account to paint a vivid picture for the jury. How did you feel when Ms. Peterson started cutting your hijab? Martinez asked. Amina took a deep breath, centering herself just as her mother had taught her. I felt violated, humiliated, like I suddenly wasn't a person anymore, just a problem that needed to be fixed. Her voice remained steady, though emotion colored her words. My hijab is part of who I am, how I practice my faith. When she cut it, it felt like she was cutting away part of me. And afterward, how did this incident affect you? I couldn't speak for almost 2 days, Amina explained. It was like my voice was trapped inside me. I had nightmares. I was afraid to go back to school. I felt… She paused, searching for the right word. Exposed. Vulnerable. Like I didn't belong anywhere anymore. Martinez nodded sympathetically. Has anything helped you begin to recover from this experience? A small smile touched Amina's lips. My family, my community, my friends at school who stood by me, and speaking up at the school board meeting with Dr. Nazari, and now here. Each time I tell my story, I feel stronger. When it was time for cross-examination, defense attorney Whitman approached with calculated gentleness, clearly aware of how poorly aggressive questioning of a child victim would play with the jury. Amina, I'm very sorry for what you experienced, he began, his tone solicitous. I just have a few questions to clarify some details. Ms. Peterson had commented on your hijab before this incident, correct? Yes, Amina confirmed. She called it a costume once, and she said it seemed un-American to cover up so much. And did you report these comments to anyone at the school? My father emailed Principal Warner about them. Whitman nodded thoughtfully. Now, on the day of the incident, the principal had made an announcement about the dress code, hadn't he? Yes, but… And isn't it possible that Ms. Peterson believed she was simply enforcing that dress code rather than targeting you specifically? Amina didn't hesitate. No, there was nothing about religious headwear in our dress code. And when she was cutting my hijab, she said, In America, we show our faces. That wasn't about dress code. That was about me being Muslim. Whitman looked momentarily discomfited by the clear response, but pressed on. Isn't it possible you misunderstood her intentions? That perhaps she was concerned about school security, being able to identify students properly? Amina met his gaze steadily. My face was never covered, just my hair. And the school had my mother's signed religious accommodation form on file. Ms. Peterson knew that. For nearly an hour, Whitman attempted to create ambiguity around the incident, suggesting miscommunications, exaggerations, and cultural misunderstandings rather than deliberate religious discrimination. Throughout, Amina remained poised and direct, neither argumentative nor intimidated, simply stating the truth as she had experienced it. When she finally stepped down from the witness stand, returning to her seat beside Prosecutor Martinez, a palpable sense of respect filled the courtroom. Even those who had come with skepticism seemed moved by the quiet dignity of this young girl who had endured public trauma, yet found the courage to confront it openly. During a brief recess, Dr. Khalid embraced his daughter. "Your mother would be so proud," he whispered. "I certainly am." Amina smiled, drawing strength from his words. "Do you think she's watching somehow, following the trial?" "If I know your mother," Dr. Khalid replied with absolute certainty, "she's found a way to get updates, even in a combat zone halfway across the world." The following day, Evelyn Peterson took the stand in her own defense. Gone was the imperious authority she had wielded in the classroom, replaced by a carefully constructed persona of a dedicated educator misunderstood by changing cultural values. "I have devoted my life to teaching," she testified, her voice catching with well-rehearsed emotion. 23 years in the classroom, trying to prepare young Americans for success in our society. "And what were you trying to accomplish that day with Amina?" Whitman asked sympathetically. "I was concerned about classroom disruption. Her hijab seemed excessive compared to more modest versions I've seen. When the principal announced the dress code reminder that morning, I felt I needed to address it." Peterson dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I never intended to hurt her feelings or disrespect her religion. I simply wanted to maintain order and consistency." During cross-examination, Martinez methodically dismantled this narrative, using Peterson's own words against her. "You said, and I quote, 'In America, we show our faces.' What exactly did you mean by that, Ms. Peterson?" Peterson shifted uncomfortably. "I meant that in our culture, open communication includes seeing each other's expressions. But Amina's face was fully visible, wasn't it? Her hijab covered only her hair, correct?" "Well, yes, but—" "And you were aware that the Khalid family had filed proper religious accommodation paperwork with the school?" "I wasn't certain if—" "Yes or no, Ms. Peterson?" "The forms were in Amina's file, which you claimed to have checked that morning." Peterson's carefully constructed facade began to crack under Martinez's precise questioning. The turning point came when Martinez introduced evidence of Peterson's social media history, a series of posts questioning Muslim integration into American society, suggesting that religious accommodations represented special treatment, and advocating for stricter assimilation requirements for immigrant communities. "These posts reflect your personal views, do they not?" Martinez asked. "My private opinions have nothing to do with my professional conduct," Peterson insisted, her voice rising defensively. "So it's merely coincidence that you specifically targeted a Muslim student, ignored established religious accommodation policies, and physically removed her religious headwear while making statements about American cultural norms?" Martinez's tone was skeptical. "That doesn't seem consistent with your claim that this was simply about dress code enforcement." By the time Peterson left the stand, her credibility was in tatters. The calculated humility had given way to defensive righteousness, revealing glimpses of the same authoritarian attitude that had led her to violate Amina's rights in the first place. Closing arguments the next day drew the largest crowd yet, with spectators lining the walls of the courtroom and an overflow room set up to accommodate additional observers. The case had captured national attention, recognized as a potential landmark in defining the boundaries of religious expression in public schools. Defense attorney Whitman went first, constructing a narrative of good intentions gone awry. "This case isn't about religious discrimination," he insisted. "It's about a dedicated teacher trying to maintain order in her classroom, perhaps overzealously, but without malicious intent. Ms. Peterson has served this community for over 2 decades. One regrettable incident shouldn't define her career or result in criminal penalties." When Martinez rose to deliver the prosecution's closing, the courtroom fell silent. She spoke without notes, her passion for justice evident in every word. "This case is fundamentally about power," she began. "The power of a teacher over a student. The power of the majority to define what's normal or American. And the abuse of that power to victimize a child because of her faith." She walked slowly before the jury, making eye contact with each member. Amina Khalid wasn't disrupting class. She wasn't breaking rules. She wasn't hiding her face or causing any legitimate concern. She was simply existing as a Muslim American girl, something that Ms. Peterson found intolerable. so intolerable that she took scissors to a child's religious garment while saying, "In America, we show our faces." Martinez paused, allowing the image to sink in. Those words revealed the true motivation behind this incident. Not dress code enforcement, not classroom management, but a fundamental belief that visible Muslim identity doesn't belong in American classrooms. That to be truly American, one must erase religious and cultural differences. She gestured toward Amina, who sat straight-backed beside her father, her emerald hijab gleaming under the courtroom lights. The Constitution of the United States guarantees religious freedom for all Americans, not just those whose practices align with the majority. When Evelyn Peterson took scissors to Amina's hijab, she wasn't enforcing school policy. She was enforcing her own narrow vision of what an American looks like, and in doing so, she committed assault, violated Amina's civil rights, and traumatized a child whose only offense was practicing her constitutionally protected faith. After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. On the count of assault in the second degree, how do you find? Judge Mosley asked the jury foreperson. "We find the defendant guilty," came the clear response. "On the count of violating civil rights, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of endangering the welfare of a child, how do you find? Guilty." A collective exhale seemed to sweep through the courtroom. Amina reached for her father's hand, tears of relief filling her eyes. Across the aisle, Ms. Peterson sat frozen, disbelief etched across her face. The carefully constructed persona of the misunderstood educator crumbled, revealing a woman facing the consequences of her actions for perhaps the first time. Judge Mosley scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later and thanked the jury for their service. As the courtroom began to clear, Amina found herself surrounded by well-wishers, community members, fellow students, and supporters who had followed the case from the beginning. Outside on the courthouse steps, standing in the same spot where her mother had promised justice all those weeks ago, Amina faced a bank of microphones and cameras. Dr. Khalid stood protectively beside her, but it was Amina who stepped forward to speak. "Today, the justice system worked," she said, her voice clear despite her youth. "But this case was never just about me or what happened to my hijab. It was about making sure that every student can go to school without having to choose between their faith and their education." She adjusted her emerald hijab slightly, a gesture of both comfort and pride. "I want to thank everyone who supported me, my family, my friends, my community, and people I've never even met who sent messages and stood by me. And I want other kids who might be afraid to be different to know that you have the right to be yourself. No one can take that away from you, not even a teacher with scissors." As the crowd dispersed, Dr. Khalid received a text message. His face lit up as he showed it to Amina. A simple message from Samira, sent during a brief window of connectivity from her deployment location. "Justice prevails. So proud of our warrior. We'll call when possible. Love to you both." 2 weeks later, Judge Mosley delivered her sentence. Evelyn Peterson received 2 years of supervised probation, 500 hours of community service specifically within culturally diverse organizations, mandatory cultural sensitivity training, permanent revocation of her teaching license, and a restraining order preventing her from contacting Amina or working in any educational setting with minors. The court recognizes that incarceration would not serve the rehabilitative goals of justice in this case, Judge Mosley stated. However, make no mistake, these are serious offenses with profound consequences. Miss Peterson, you violated the constitutional rights and personal dignity of a child entrusted to your care. That violation demands significant accountability. As summer arrived, bringing warm days and the freedom of school vacation, Amina found herself adjusting to a new normal. The trial had changed her in ways both subtle and profound. She was more confident, more aware of her own strength, more committed to speaking up not just for herself, but for others. The case had also catalyzed important changes throughout the school district. Under Dr. Nazari's guidance, comprehensive religious literacy training had been implemented for all staff. The dress code had been explicitly revised to protect religious expression. A diverse student-parent advisory council now reviewed all policies for potential bias. And perhaps most significantly, awareness had been raised about the importance of creating truly inclusive educational environments. One sunny afternoon in July, Amina sat cross-legged on her bed, creating a scrapbook of the entire experience. Newspaper clippings, supportive cards from community members, photos of her friends wearing purple butterflies in solidarity. It wasn't to dwell on the trauma, but to honor the journey and preserve the lessons learned. The doorbell rang, and moments later her father called up the stairs. "Amina, special delivery!" She hurried down to find a package on the kitchen counter, postmarked from halfway around the world. With trembling fingers, She opened it to reveal a beautiful silk scarf in shimmering gold and purple, along with a handwritten note from her mother. "My brave Amina, this scarf was given to me by a young woman here who heard about your story. Her grandmother wove it by hand. She asked me to tell you that Muslim women around the world stand with you, and that your courage has inspired them. I count the days until I return home, but know that I carry you in my heart always. You have shown the world what it means to stand firm in your faith and identity, even when it's difficult. I couldn't be prouder of the young woman you're becoming. With all my love." Mom tears filled Amina's eyes as she wrapped the beautiful scarf around her shoulders, feeling connected to her mother despite the thousands of miles between them. The cloth represented more than just a gift. It was a tangible reminder that her individual stand for justice had rippled outward, touching lives she would never even meet. The sound of a car in the driveway pulled her from her thoughts. Looking out the window, she saw Maya and several other friends arriving for their planned afternoon at the community pool. Amina carefully folded her mother's note and placed it in her scrapbook before grabbing her swim bag, which included her specially designed swim hijab that allowed her to enjoy the water while maintaining her religious observance. This, too, was part of healing, finding joy in ordinary moments, embracing both her faith and her childhood, refusing to let trauma define her future. As she joined her friends, laughing and chatting about summer plans, Dr. Khalid watched from the porch with quiet pride. The road to recovery wasn't complete. Amina still had occasional nightmares, still sometimes grew quiet when passing certain areas of the school, still sometimes reached up to check that her hijab was secure. But she was moving forward with remarkable resilience, drawing strength from the very identity that Ms. Peterson had tried to erase. In the months that followed, the case became a reference point in national discussions about religious freedom in schools. Legal experts cited it in arguments for stronger protections for students' religious expression. Educators used it as a case study in cultural competency training. Faith communities across the spectrum recognized it as an important precedent for defending constitutional rights, regardless of which religion was being practiced. When Lieutenant Colonel Samira Khalid returned from deployment in September, she was greeted not just by her overjoyed family, but by a community that had been transformed in her absence. The school district that had once enabled discrimination now actively promoted inclusion. The classroom that had been a site of trauma had become a model of respectful education. And most importantly, her daughter had not merely survived her ordeal, but had emerged from it stronger, wiser, and more deeply connected to her faith and heritage. On her first day back at work, Samira found a small package on her desk at the base. Inside was a purple butterfly pin and a note from her commanding officer. "For the mother of the bravest girl I know, your family's courage has made our entire community better." That evening, as the Khalid family sat together for dinner for the first time in months, Amina looked around at the familiar faces, the comfortable routines, the symbols of their faith and culture that adorned their home. Ms. Peterson had tried to cut away a piece of her identity, but had instead strengthened Amina's connection to who she was and what she believed. "I've been thinking," Amina said suddenly, setting down her fork. "I want to start a support group at school for kids who feel different or excluded because of their religion or culture or anything else that makes them stand out." Samira and Dr. Khalid exchanged proud glances across the table. "That's a wonderful idea, Habibi," Samira encouraged. "What would this group do?" "Help kids know their rights. Teach them to speak up when something feels wrong. Maybe have older students mentor younger ones." Amina's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "And we could invite speakers from different backgrounds to help teachers and students understand each other better." Dr. Khalid smiled at his daughter's vision. "It sounds like you're creating the resource you wished you'd had when Ms. Peterson targeted you." Amina nodded thoughtfully. "Exactly. If even one kid feels safer because of this group, it would be worth it." As the conversation continued, plans evolving and expanding with each family member's input, the final pieces of healing seemed to fall into place. What had begun as a traumatic violation, scissors cutting through fabric, through dignity, through belonging, had transformed into something powerful and constructive. Not just repair, but renewal. Not just justice, but growth. Later that night, as Samira helped Amina arrange her hijab for the next school day, their reflections gazed back at them from the bedroom mirror. 2 generations of Muslim American women, standing tall in both their faith and their freedom. "Ready for tomorrow?" Samira asked, securing the final pin. Amina smiled at their reflection, at the beautiful purple butterfly catching the light near her temple, a symbol of transformation that had become her own. "Ready for everything," she replied. And she was.